Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
What happens when the divine masculine can no longer numb his feelings? What happens when the distractions stop working? When the silence no longer protects him? When the distance he created no longer makes him feel free? Because for a long time, he may have known how to survive by not feeling too much. He may have stayed busy, stayed logical, stayed controlled, stayed emotionally unavailable enough to avoid the full weight of what was happening inside him. He may have told himself he was fine. He may have called it peace. He may have called it independence. He may have called it moving on. But what if it was not peace? What if it was numbness? And what if the connection, the memory, the longing, the soul recognition, and the truth he tried to bury finally begin rising louder than his defenses? That is when everything changes. Because the divine masculine may be able to numb his feelings for a while. He may be able to push them down through work, control, silence, distance, pride, distractions, or another version of himself that looks strong from the outside. But when the soul is touched, numbness does not last forever. Eventually, something starts breaking through. A memory he cannot shake. A tenderness he cannot explain. A longing he cannot silence. A truth that keeps returning when the world becomes quiet. And suddenly, the old strategy stops working. He cannot distract himself the same way. He cannot pretend with the same confidence. He cannot call the connection meaningless and fully believe it. He cannot keep telling himself he feels nothing when something inside him is clearly still alive. So what happens then? What happens when the man who survived by feeling less is forced to feel everything he has been avoiding? Does he collapse? Does he awaken? Does he run again? Or does he finally begin to meet the hidden heart he has been trying to silence? That is the journey we are going into today. Because when the divine masculine can no longer numb his feelings, the first thing that rises is not always love. Sometimes it is fear. Sometimes it is grief. Sometimes it is regret. Sometimes it is the painful realization that what he tried to avoid was never gone. It was waiting beneath the silence, waiting beneath the control, waiting beneath the distance, waiting beneath the old masculine mask that told him feeling deeply was dangerous. And if you have ever wondered why he suddenly becomes emotional, why he reaches out after silence, why he seems restless, reflective, or different after a long period of distance, stay with me. Because when numbness begins to break, the divine masculine is not only feeling you, he is feeling himself again. And that may be the most shocking awakening of all. Chapter 1. The moment numbness stops protecting him. There comes a moment when numbness stops feeling like safety and starts feeling like a prison. That is where this journey begins. Because for a long time, the divine masculine may have used numbness as protection. Not always consciously. Not always with clear intention. Sometimes it became a habit so early, so quietly, so naturally, that he did not even recognize it as numbness anymore. He called it being strong. He called it staying focused. He called it being logical. He called it moving on. He called it not letting emotions control him. But underneath all of those names, something deeper may have been happening. He was learning how not to feel. Not too deeply. Not too honestly. Not for too long. Not in a way that would force him to face the parts of himself he did not know how to hold. And maybe for a while that worked. Numbness gave him space from pain. It helped him survive moments he was not ready to process. It helped him keep functioning when his heart felt too heavy. It allowed him to keep going when vulnerability felt unsafe, when love felt confusing, when loss felt unbearable, when tenderness felt like something that could destroy the image of who he believed he had to be. So he became good at it. Good at staying busy. Good at staying controlled. Good at changing the subject. Good at disappearing into work, routine, silence, logic, or distance. Good at convincing himself that if he did not talk about what he felt, maybe the feeling would eventually disappear. But feelings do not disappear just because they are denied. They wait. They wait beneath the surface. They wait beneath the silence. They wait beneath the performance of being fine. They wait beneath the masculine mask that says, "Nothing can touch me." And when the soul has been touched, they wait with memory. That is the part he may not understand at first. He may believe numbness is control. He may believe that if he can shut the feeling down, he has won. He may believe that if he does not reach out, does not confess, does not cry, does not admit longing, does not allow himself to soften, then he is safe. But numbness is not the same as healing. Numbness is only the absence of felt truth. And the truth does not stop existing because he refuses to feel it. This is why, eventually, numbness begins to fail. Not all at once. Not always dramatically. But slowly. A thought gets through. A memory gets through. A dream gets through. A song gets through. A quiet moment gets through. A sudden ache in the chest gets through. And he realizes that the wall is not as solid as it used to be. The old distractions do not work the same way. The old logic does not calm him the same way. The old distance does not give him the same sense of freedom. He may still be able to function. He may still look composed from the outside. But inside, something is beginning to press against the numbness. Something alive. Something unfinished. Something he tried to bury before it had a chance to speak. That is the moment numbness stops protecting him. Because now, the very defense that once helped him survive is beginning to suffocate him. He may begin to feel restless without understanding why. He may feel emotionally heavy even when nothing obvious has happened. He may feel irritated by ordinary things because something deeper is moving underneath. He may feel pulled towards silence and afraid of it at the same time. Because silence is where the feelings start rising. And then the questions begin. Why am I thinking about this again? Why does this memory still have weight? Why does her energy still feel present? Why does something in me ache when I thought I was past it? Why does my life look controlled, but my inner world feel unsettled? These questions mark the beginning of emotional thawing. The ice begins to crack. And the first crack can be frightening. Because when a man has survived by numbing his feelings, feeling again can feel like danger. It can feel like losing the very protection that helped him remain composed. It can feel like being exposed to a storm he thought he had escaped. It can feel like all the emotions he pushed down are returning at once, asking to be felt, understood, and finally honored. That is why he may resist. Even when numbness is hurting him, he may still cling to it. Because numbness is familiar. And familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar truth. He may tell himself, "I am fine." But his body does not believe him. He may tell himself, "It does not matter anymore." But the memory keeps returning. He may tell himself, "I have moved on." But the silence reveals what movement could not erase. He may tell himself, "I do not feel anything." But something in him is beginning to feel everything he tried not to feel. This is where his old identity begins to shake. Because the divine masculine may have built a sense of strength around emotional control. He may have believed that the ability to suppress pain meant he was powerful. He may have believed that not needing, not longing, not crying, not admitting vulnerability meant he was safe. He may have believed that the heart could be managed like a problem, disciplined like a weakness, silenced like an inconvenience. But the heart is not an inconvenience. The heart is a messenger. And if he refuses to listen for too long, the message does not vanish. It becomes louder. It may become tension in the body. It may become heaviness in the chest. It may become restless sleep. It may become dreams that bring back what he avoided. It may become sudden emotion in moments where he expected to feel nothing. This is not punishment. It is return. The return of the hidden heart. The return of the truth beneath the defense. The return of the parts of him that were never meant to stay frozen forever. And this return can be disorienting. Because he may not know how to feel without becoming overwhelmed. He may not know how to grieve without feeling weak. He may not know how to miss someone without judging himself for it. He may not know how to admit that something affected him without feeling like he has lost control. So when numbness begins to break, he may not immediately become soft and open. He may become unsettled. More withdrawn, more reflective, more emotionally unpredictable. more easily triggered by memories he thought were buried, more aware that the old ways of coping are no longer enough. This is important. When the divine masculine can no longer numb his feelings, the first sign is not always confession. Sometimes the first sign is discomfort, because the emotional system is waking up. The feelings he avoided are not returning in a neat, gentle, organized way. They may come in waves. They may come through silence. They may come through regret. They may come through longing. They may come through anger at himself for still caring. They may come through sadness he does not know how to explain. And if he does not understand what is happening, he may try to numb again. He may increase the distractions. He may work harder. He may become more distant. He may act even more controlled. He may tell himself even more forcefully that nothing is wrong. But the soul knows. The soul knows when numbness is no longer protection. The soul knows when the heart is ready to feel again. The soul knows when a connection, a memory, a truth, or an unfinished emotional lesson has reached too deeply to remain buried. And once the soul begins to rise, the old numbness becomes unstable. That is why he may feel like two men inside one body. One part of him still wants to shut everything down. Another part wants to feel the truth. One part wants to stay distant. Another part is tired of the loneliness that distance creates. One part wants to preserve the mask. Another part is quietly begging to breathe. This inner split can become exhausting, because numbness no longer gives him peace, but feeling still frightens him. So he stands between two worlds, the old world of control and the new world of emotional truth. The old world says, do not feel this. The new world says, you have to feel this to heal. The old world says, stay numb and you will stay safe. The new world says, numbness is not safety anymore. It is separation from yourself. That is the sacred tension of Chapter 1. Numbness once protected him from pain he could not face. But now that same numbness is keeping him from the life, love, tenderness, and truth his soul is asking him to reclaim. This is why the moment numbness stops protecting him is both frightening and holy. Frightening because the feelings come back. Holy because the feelings prove that he is not dead inside. He is not as cold as he pretended. He is not as unaffected as he appeared. He is not as detached as he wanted to believe. He is not beyond tenderness, longing, regret, love, or awakening. Something in him is still alive. And what is alive can heal. That is the deeper truth. When numbness begins to break, it means the heart is trying to return to itself. It means the emotional body is no longer willing to remain locked away. It means the masculine soul is beginning to reject the false peace of avoidance and move toward the painful but liberating honesty of feeling. And this is where transformation begins. Not when he has all the answers. Not when he knows exactly what to say. Not when he suddenly becomes emotionally available overnight. Transformation begins when he can no longer lie to himself with the same ease. When I am fine no longer feels true. When I do not care no longer sounds believable inside his own chest. When I have moved on begins to collapse under the weight of what still returns in silence. That is the beginning of seeing, the beginning of feeling, the beginning of admitting that what he buried was not gone. It was waiting for him to become ready. And for you, this chapter carries an important message. If you have sensed that his numbness was not the full truth, you may have been feeling something real. Maybe he looked distant, but the energy was not empty. Maybe he seemed controlled, but something unresolved lived beneath the surface. Maybe he acted as if nothing touched him, but the connection still carried an invisible weight. But understanding his numbness does not mean you should wait forever in confusion. You are not here to stand outside the walls of a man who refuses to open them. You are not here to prove your worth by trying to make him feel. You are not here to become the emotional bridge between his numbness and his healing while abandoning your own peace. His awakening is sacred, but so is yours. If numbness is breaking inside him, he must choose what he does with the feelings that return. He can run back into distraction. He can rebuild the wall. He can become even more guarded for a time. Or he can begin to listen slowly and honestly, to what his heart has been trying to tell him. That choice belongs to him. And your choice belongs to you. You can hold compassion without losing yourself. You can understand that numbness was once his protection without accepting emotional unavailability as your home. You can recognize the sacredness of his process without making your life wait at the threshold of his readiness. Because love is not about rescuing someone from their own feelings. Love is about meeting each other in truth. And if he can no longer numb his feelings, then truth is beginning to rise in him. But truth must become responsibility. Feeling must become honesty. Awakening must become action. Otherwise, the same cycle will continue. He will feel. He will panic. He will numb. He will miss. He will return to silence. And the heart will remain trapped between longing and fear. That is not the final destination. The final destination is integration. The place where he can feel without collapsing. Where he can remember without running. Where he can admit longing without shame. Where he can stop treating emotional truth as a threat to his masculinity. Where he can understand that the feelings he numbed were not enemies. They were messengers. Messengers of what mattered. Messengers of what hurt. Messengers of what he desired. Messengers of what he feared. Messengers of the parts of himself that still wanted to be healed. That is why numbness breaking is not a failure. It is a beginning. It is the beginning of his return to the heart. The beginning of his confrontation with truth. The beginning of the divine masculine realizing that strength is not the absence of feeling. Strength is the courage to feel what is real and not abandon yourself in the process. That is where chapter 1 leaves us. With the understanding that numbness may have once protected him, but it cannot protect him forever. When the soul has been touched, the feelings return. And when they return, they do not come to destroy him. They come to wake him. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for chapter 2. Because next we are going deeper into why distractions no longer feel like freedom, and why the very things he used to escape his emotions may begin to feel empty once his heart starts coming back to life. Chapter 2. Why distractions no longer feel like freedom. At first, distraction can feel like freedom. That is where this chapter begins. Because when the divine masculine does not want to feel what is rising inside him, he may reach for anything that helps him stay away from the deeper truth. Work, routine, noise, social obligations, fitness, success, other conversations, other people, endless scrolling, late nights, busy mornings, a schedule so full that silence has no room to breathe. And for a while, it may seem to work. If he stays busy, he does not have to feel the ache. If he keeps moving, he does not have to face the memory. If he keeps achieving, he does not have to admit the emptiness. If he keeps his life loud enough, he does not have to hear what the heart is trying to say. So he calls it being productive. He calls it staying disciplined. He calls it focusing on himself. He calls it moving forward. But sometimes, what looks like moving forward is only running with better language. That is the hidden truth. Because distraction can create movement without healing. It can fill the day without feeding the soul. It can make him look like he is doing well while something inside him remains untouched, unprocessed, and quietly waiting. He may wake up and go straight into tasks, messages, work, plans, responsibilities. He may push his body harder, keep his mind occupied, keep his face composed. He may become the man everyone believes is fine because he is functioning so well. But functioning is not the same as feeling free. And eventually, the distractions that once protected him begin to feel empty. The work no longer fully absorbs him. The noise no longer fully covers the silence. The conversations no longer fully satisfy him. The achievements no longer give the same emotional relief. The distance no longer feels like peace. That is when he begins to notice something strange. The life he built to avoid feeling has become too small for the feelings that are returning. And this can be deeply unsettling. Because for a long time, distractions may have given him the illusion of power. They allowed him to control where his attention went. They helped him avoid the places inside himself that felt tender, unfinished, or too emotionally charged. They gave him something to do instead of something to feel. But when the soul begins waking up, doing is no longer enough. The heart wants to be heard. And the heart has a way of interrupting even the busiest life. It may interrupt him in the middle of a meeting. It may interrupt him on the drive home. It may interrupt him when he is laughing with other people. It may interrupt him when he is lying in bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. It may interrupt him in the quiet second between one distraction and the next. And suddenly there it is. The feeling. The memory. The truth he thought he could outrun. He may not even understand why it arrives. Maybe he hears a song that brings something back. Maybe he passes a place that carries your energy. Maybe someone says a phrase that reminds him of a conversation. Maybe he sees something ordinary, and without warning, the inner world shifts. For a moment, the distraction falls away, and what was buried rises. That is when he begins to realize distraction is not freedom. It is delay. It delayed the grief. It delayed the longing. It delayed the emotional reckoning. It delayed the moment when he would have to admit that numbness was not peace. This realization can be uncomfortable because it exposes the difference between being busy and being healed. A busy man can still be haunted. A successful man can still be lonely. A composed man can still be carrying unspoken emotion. A man surrounded by noise can still be unable to escape the silence inside him. That is why distractions eventually lose their power. Because they do not answer the deeper question. What are you avoiding? He may avoid the question for a long time. He may keep telling himself there is nothing to feel, nothing to revisit, nothing to understand. He may convince himself that thinking about the connection, the tenderness, the regret, the unresolved truth, or the emotional imprint is unnecessary. But the heart does not care what the ego labels unnecessary. The heart knows what remains unfinished. And what remains unfinished will keep returning, not to punish him, but to be completed through awareness. This is why the divine masculine may begin to feel restless even in the middle of a life that looks full. He may have goals, responsibilities, routines, distractions, and options. But beneath all of it, something may feel missing. Something quiet, something honest. Something that cannot be replaced by achievement or noise. He may ask himself, why do I still feel unsettled? Why does being busy no longer calm me? Why does every distraction eventually feel empty? Why do I keep returning to the same memory when I thought I had moved beyond it? These questions show that the inner world is breaking through the outer performance. And that breakthrough matters. Because when distractions stop working, the divine masculine is brought closer to the truth he has avoided. He may not welcome it. He may resist it. He may try even harder to escape it. But the old methods no longer give the same relief because the feeling has become too alive to stay buried. It is like trying to hold water in closed hands. The harder he grips, the more it escapes through the cracks. And the cracks may begin to appear everywhere. In his sleep. In his mood. In his silence. In his sudden nostalgia. In his irritability. In his inability to feel fully present with things that used to distract him. This is not random. It is the emotional body asking for attention. It is the soul saying, you cannot keep using the outer world to avoid the inner one. That is a sacred moment, even if it does not feel sacred at first. Because when distractions lose their power, he is forced to meet the place inside him that never received care. He is forced to notice the longing beneath the busyness, the tenderness beneath the control, the grief beneath the discipline, the emotional hunger beneath the appearance of independence. And he may not like what he sees. He may realize that he was not as free as he thought. He was only occupied. Occupied with work. Occupied with image. Occupied with routine. Occupied with proving he was okay. Occupied with anything that helped him avoid the truth that something inside him was still aching. That recognition can humble him, because it shows him that distraction was not true strength. It was a coping mechanism. And while coping may have helped him survive, it cannot become the place where he lives forever. At some point, survival must become healing. At some point, avoidance must become awareness. At some point, the man who stays busy to escape the heart must sit still long enough to hear it. But stillness can terrify him, because stillness is where the truth speaks. In stillness, he may feel the memory of what he lost. In stillness, he may feel the tenderness he denied. In stillness, he may feel the regret he buried under control. In stillness, he may feel the emotional weight of what he never said. In stillness, he may feel that the connection affected him more deeply than he allowed himself to admit. So he may fear stillness. He may keep reaching for movement. But the more he avoids stillness, the more exhausted he becomes. Because running from your own heart takes energy. Pretending takes energy. Suppressing takes energy. Maintaining the image of being fine takes energy. Keeping the feelings buried takes more energy than finally facing them. And eventually, he may become tired. Not physically tired only. Soul tired. Tired of acting unaffected. Tired of needing constant distraction. Tired of pretending silence is peace. Tired of carrying feelings he refuses to name. Tired of living in a body that knows the truth while the mind keeps denying it. That soul tiredness can become the doorway. Because when he becomes too tired to keep running, he may finally begin to listen. Not perfectly. Not all at once. Not without fear. But he may begin. He may begin to admit that the distractions are no longer enough. He may begin to notice that the busyness did not heal the ache. He may begin to understand that the connection, the memory, the feeling, or the unresolved emotional truth did not disappear just because he filled his life with other things. And this is where the deeper awakening begins. Because once he sees that distractions are empty, he may start asking what is real. What actually brings me peace? What do I truly feel when I stop running? What have I been avoiding beneath all this movement? What part of me has been trying to speak through the silence? These are not comfortable questions, but they are honest. And honesty is the beginning of freedom. Not the false freedom of distraction. Not the freedom of staying busy enough to avoid pain. Not the freedom of pretending nothing matters. But the real freedom of no longer being afraid of his own inner world. That is what the divine masculine is moving toward when distractions stop working. He is being called out of avoidance and into presence, out of noise and into truth, out of performance and into emotional reality, out of the life that looks controlled and into the heart that wants to be known. And this can change everything. Because when he stops believing distraction is freedom, he also stops mistaking numbness for peace. He begins to understand that peace is not the absence of feeling. Peace is the ability to sit with what is real without needing to escape it. Peace is being able to remember without running. Peace is being able to feel longing without shaming it. Peace is being able to face regret without collapsing into denial. Peace is being able to say, "This touched me," without needing to rebuild the wall immediately. That is true freedom. And it may take time for him to get there. Because the old self will not surrender easily. The old self may still reach for distraction. It may still say, "Do not feel this. Keep moving. Stay occupied. Stay above it." The old self may still believe that if he slows down, everything he has avoided will finally catch up to him. And maybe it will. But maybe that is not the worst thing. Maybe what catches up to him is not here to destroy him. Maybe it is here to return him to himself. The grief may return to be released. The longing may return to be understood. The tenderness may return to be honored. The memory may return to show him what mattered. The truth may return because it is tired of being buried. That is why this stage is so powerful. When distractions no longer feel like freedom, he is no longer able to hide as easily. He can still try, but something in him knows the difference now. Something in him knows that busyness is not healing. Noise is not intimacy. Achievement is not emotional safety. Other attention is not the same as being truly seen. And once he knows that, the old distractions begin to taste different. They may still occupy him, but they do not nourish him. They may still fill time, but they do not fill the emptiness. They may still give temporary relief, but they do not bring him home to his heart. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 2. Distractions stop feeling like freedom when the divine masculine soul is ready for truth. The things he used to escape his feelings begin to lose power because the feelings are no longer willing to stay silent. He may still try to stay busy, controlled, logical, or distant, but the deeper self is beginning to rise. And when the deeper self rises, every false refuge becomes harder to live inside. The noise becomes too loud. The busyness becomes too empty. The silence becomes too honest. The old escape routes become too small for the man he is becoming. That is not punishment. That is awakening. Because the soul does not remove his distractions to make him suffer. It removes their power, so he can finally see what needs healing. And for you, let this chapter remind you of something important. If he has been distracting himself from what he feels, you do not need to compete with the distractions. You do not need to become louder than his silence, more available than his avoidance, or more convincing than his fear. What is real inside him will eventually meet him when he is quiet enough to hear it. But his quiet is his responsibility. You cannot force him to stop running. You cannot make distractions lose their power. You cannot become the truth he refuses to face. You can only stay rooted in your own truth. Because his awakening is not measured by whether he thinks of you in silence. It is measured by whether he becomes honest with himself when those thoughts arrive. It is measured by whether he lets the feelings teach him or whether he runs back into another distraction. It is measured by whether he uses the return of emotion as a doorway to healing or as another reason to hide. So let the distractions fall when they are ready to fall. Let the truth rise when it is ready to rise. And do not lose yourself trying to interrupt his avoidance before his soul does. Because when the divine masculine can no longer numb his feelings, distractions will eventually fail on their own. The work will not silence everything. The noise will not cover everything. The routine will not erase everything. The distance will not protect everything. Something real will keep returning. And when it does, he will have to decide whether to run again or finally listen. That is where Chapter 2 leaves us. With the understanding that distractions no longer feel like freedom when his heart begins coming back to life. The life he used to escape his emotions may start feeling empty because the soul is calling him towards something deeper, something quieter, something more honest than avoidance. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 3. Because next we are going deeper into the return of the feelings he buried, and why the emotions he thought were gone may begin rising through memory, dreams, longing, and the quiet moments he can no longer escape. Chapter 3. The return of the feelings he buried. The feelings he buried do not always return loudly. Sometimes they return quietly. That is where this chapter begins. Because when the divine masculine has spent a long time numbing himself, he may expect emotion to return like a breakdown, a sudden confession, a dramatic collapse, a moment where everything finally spills out of him at once. But often, it does not begin that way. Often, the return of feeling begins in small places. A memory, a dream, a song, a familiar street, a silence that suddenly feels too full, a moment where he is doing something ordinary, and something inside him unexpectedly aches. He may not understand it at first. He may be working, driving, exercising, sitting alone at night, talking to someone else, moving through his routine exactly the way he always has. And then, without warning, something rises from beneath the numbness. Not a clear sentence. Not always a full emotion. Just a feeling. A trace. A pull. A heaviness. A tenderness. A sudden memory that feels more alive than it should. And he may ask himself, why is this coming back now? Why do I still feel this? Why does one small detail open something inside me? Why does the past feel present when I thought I had buried it? This is the return of the feelings he buried. And it can be deeply unsettling. Because buried feelings do not return only as sadness. Sometimes they return as restlessness. Sometimes as irritation. Sometimes as longing. Sometimes as nostalgia. Sometimes as a strange softness in the chest he does not know how to explain. Sometimes as an urge to reach out, followed immediately by fear. That is why this stage can confuse him. He may not know whether he misses you, misses himself, misses the connection, or misses the version of life that briefly opened when his heart was not completely numb. Because sometimes what returns is not only the feeling for another person. It is the feeling of being alive. That is what shocks him. He may have thought he was over it because the pain was quiet. He may have thought he had healed because he stopped reacting. He may have thought he was free because he could go days without speaking. He may have thought he had moved on because he was functioning again. But numbness can imitate healing. And when the buried feelings return, he begins to see the difference. Healing brings peace. Numbness brings silence. Healing softens the heart. Numbness disconnects it. Healing lets him remember without running. Numbness only helps him not feel what he remembers. And now, when the feelings begin to return, the truth becomes harder to avoid. He may realize that what he buried was not finished. It was only waiting beneath the surface, waiting for a moment when his defenses became tired enough, thin enough, or cracked enough for the hidden heart to speak again. This is why dreams can become powerful in this stage. During the day, he may control himself. He may stay logical. He may keep busy. He may refuse to think too deeply. But at night, when the conscious mind becomes quiet, the buried emotions may begin to rise through dreams. He may dream of a conversation that never happened, a place connected to the past, a version of you that feels familiar and distant at the same time, a moment where he reaches for something he lost, a feeling he cannot shake when he wakes up. And he may try to dismiss it. It was just a dream. But the feeling remains. Because sometimes the dream is not about the literal person only. Sometimes it is about the emotional truth he has not processed, the longing he denied, the grief he avoided, the tenderness he shut down, the part of himself that is still trying to reach consciousness. Dreams become the language of the buried heart. And memory becomes another doorway. A song may bring back your energy. A scent may bring back a moment. A phrase may bring back your voice. A place may bring back the feeling of what was left unsaid. And suddenly, he is not as numb as he thought. For a moment, the wall opens. And something real enters. This can make him feel exposed, even when he is alone. Because being alone does not protect him from the truth inside him. In fact, sometimes solitude makes the truth stronger. When there is no one to perform for, no one to impress, no one to distract him, no immediate role to play, he may feel the inner world more clearly. And that inner world may not be empty. It may be full of everything he did not let himself feel. The sadness, the regret, the tenderness, the fear, the longing, the love he never named, the ache of what he could not hold at the time. This is where he may become uncomfortable with his own inner life. Because if he buried those feelings to feel safe, their return may feel like a betrayal. He may think his heart is working against him. He may resent the emotions for coming back. He may feel frustrated that he cannot simply stay detached. He may wonder why his system will not let him remain in control. But the heart is not betraying him. The heart is trying to heal. And healing often begins by bringing the buried things back into awareness. Not to punish him, but to free him. Because whatever remains buried still has power. It may influence his choices, his silence, his distance, his ability to love, his ability to trust, his ability to receive intimacy without fear. Buried emotion does not disappear. It becomes a hidden force. It may make him avoid closeness. It may make him fear tenderness. It may make him pull away after feeling too much. It may make him mistake numbness for strength. It may make him repeat patterns he does not understand. So when the buried feelings return, it is not a failure. It is an invitation. An invitation to stop running from the inner truth. An invitation to finally feel what was too overwhelming before. An invitation to listen to the part of himself that has been waiting beneath the numbness. An invitation to understand what the heart has been trying to say all along. But invitations can still frighten him. So he may resist. He may try to push the memory away. He may reach for another distraction. He may become emotionally defensive. He may tell himself the feeling is temporary. He may judge himself for still caring. This judgment is important. Because when feelings return, shame often returns with them. He may think, why am I still affected? Why can I not just move on? Why does this still matter? Why do I feel weak for remembering? Why does something in me still respond? These questions reveal the old wound around emotion. He is not only feeling the feeling, he is judging himself for feeling it. And that judgment can make the return of emotion even heavier. Because now the heart is not only trying to speak, it is trying to speak through layers of shame, pride, fear, and old masculine conditioning. It is trying to be heard inside a man who may still believe that feeling deeply means losing control. But feeling is not losing control. Feeling is receiving information from the soul. The ache tells him something mattered. The memory tells him something remains unresolved. The longing tells him something in him still reaches. The grief tells him something needs to be honored, not buried. If he can learn to listen this way, the return of feeling becomes sacred. But if he continues to judge it, he may turn the awakening into another battle. One part of him feels. Another part attacks the feeling. One part remembers. Another part says, forget. One part wants to understand. Another part says, do not go there. And this inner conflict can exhaust him, because it takes enormous energy to fight what is rising from within. That is why he may seem restless in this stage. He may not know how to sit still. He may not know why he feels heavier than usual. He may not know why old memories return. He may not know why certain emotions appear without clear explanation. But something inside him knows. The buried heart is coming back. And once it starts returning, it may not obey the old rules. It may not wait for the perfect time. It may not arrive in a form he can control. It may not ask whether he feels ready. It may simply rise because the soul can no longer remain buried. This is why the divine masculine may experience sudden emotional waves. He may feel calm one day and tender the next. He may feel detached in the morning and deeply reflective at night. He may feel certain he is fine, and then one memory opens a door he thought was locked. That does not mean he is going backward. It may mean he is finally going inward. And going inward is not always neat. It can look like confusion before clarity. It can look like grief before peace. It can look like longing before understanding. It can look like emotional discomfort before true healing begins. This is important because many people expect awakening to look beautiful from the outside. But sometimes awakening looks like a man finally unable to keep lying to himself. It looks like him sitting with a feeling he cannot explain. It looks like him realizing that distance did not erase everything. It looks like him remembering what he tried to forget. It looks like him being humbled by the fact that his heart still responds. And in this stage, the feelings may not all be about romance. They may be deeper than that. He may feel grief for the connection, but also grief for his own emotional absence. He may feel longing for you, but also longing for the part of himself that felt alive with you. He may feel regret for what happened, but also regret for the years he spent choosing numbness over honesty. He may feel tenderness for the bond, but also tenderness for the wounded parts of himself he has been ignoring. That is why the return of feelings can become so layered. It is not just, I miss her. It may be, I miss who I was when I allowed myself to feel. I miss the softness I pushed away. I miss the truth I was too afraid to honor. I miss the part of myself that came alive before I shut down again. That is a much deeper awakening. Because now the divine masculine is not only confronting his feelings about the connection. He is confronting his relationship with feeling itself. Can he allow sadness without turning it into shame? Can he allow longing without turning it into weakness? Can he allow memory without running back into distraction? Can he allow tenderness without needing to numb it again? These questions shape his healing. Because the real problem was never that he had feelings. The problem was that he did not know how to stay present with them. And when the buried feelings return, he has a chance to learn. He can learn that emotion is not an enemy. He can learn that grief does not destroy him. He can learn that longing does not make him powerless. He can learn that tenderness does not make him less masculine. He can learn that memory can teach him instead of trapping him. But again, he must choose. He can meet the feelings, or he can numb them again. He can listen, or he can distract. He can let the return of emotion become a doorway. or he can treat it like a threat and rebuild the wall. That choice determines the next stage of his awakening. If he chooses numbness again, the cycle repeats. The feelings go underground. The mask returns. The silence deepens. But the buried emotions do not disappear. They simply wait for another crack. But if he chooses to listen, something sacred begins. The emotion becomes information. The memory becomes understanding. The longing becomes a teacher. The grief becomes a doorway into truth. And slowly, he begins to become more whole. Not because he no longer feels pain, but because he no longer has to abandon himself when pain appears. That is the sacred shift. The divine masculine begins to realize that the feelings he buried are not here to weaken him. They are here to return him to the parts of himself he left behind. The part that can love. The part that can grieve. The part that can miss. The part that can be tender. The part that can finally admit this mattered. That admission may be quiet. It may not come to you first. It may happen alone, in the private room of his own heart. But it matters, because the first truth he tells may be the truth he tells himself. And that truth may sound like, I was not as over it as I thought. I buried this because I did not know how to feel it. I thought numbness was strength, but maybe it was fear. I still feel something, and I need to understand why. That is where healing begins. Not in immediate action, but in honest awareness. For you, this chapter carries an important reminder. If his feelings are returning, you may sense it. You may feel shifts in energy. You may notice him becoming more reflective, more restless, more emotionally affected, or more drawn inward. But his returning feelings are still his responsibility. Do not make it your job to pull the emotions out of him. Do not chase the signs. Do not build your peace around whether he finally feels what he buried. Because what he feels must eventually become what he is willing to face. Feeling alone is not enough. He must become honest with it. He must become responsible for it. He must decide whether the return of emotion will lead to growth or another cycle of avoidance. And you must continue choosing yourself. Because your heart is not a waiting room for his emotional thawing. Your love is not a tool to prove he can still feel. Your presence is not meant to be used as a mirror he looks into only when he is finally tired of being numb. You are sacred too. Your healing matters too. Your peace matters too. So let the feelings return to him if they are meant to return. Let the buried truth rise inside him. Let the memory speak. Let the silence teach. Let the heart do what the heart knows how to do. But do not stop living while he learns how to feel. That is where wisdom lives. Compassion without self-abandonment. Understanding without waiting in pain. Love without losing your center. Because the divine masculine's return to feeling may be powerful, but your return to yourself is just as sacred. That is the deeper truth of Chapter 3. The feelings he buried return when numbness can no longer hold them down. They may rise through dreams, memories, longing, sadness, restlessness, tenderness, or silence. And when they return, they do not come to destroy him. They come to show him what still needs healing, what still matters, and what part of himself is ready to come back to life. The question is not whether the feelings return. The question is whether he will finally listen. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 4. Because next we are going deeper into when he realizes he was not over it, and why the moment he thought was closure may have only been the silence of a heart that had not yet learned how to feel. Chapter 4. When he realizes he was not over it. There comes a moment when the divine masculine realizes he was not over it. He was only numb. That is where this chapter begins. Because for a long time, he may have mistaken the absence of emotion for healing. He may have believed that because he could get through the day, he was free. Because he stopped talking about it, he had moved on. Because he stopped reacting outwardly, the feeling must have disappeared. Because he could create distance, stay silent, stay busy, and stay composed, the connection no longer had power over him. But then something returns. A memory. A dream. A wave of longing. A sudden heaviness in the chest. A quiet ache that arrives when nothing external has changed. And in that moment, he begins to understand the difference. Being numb is not the same as being over it. Being silent is not the same as being healed. Being distant is not the same as being free. This realization can shock him because it challenges the entire story he told himself. He may have believed he was past the connection because he no longer allowed himself to feel it fully. He may have believed time had erased what happened because the emotional intensity became quieter. He may have believed that if he could stop reaching, stop explaining, stop remembering out loud, then the deeper truth had finally disappeared. But the truth did not disappear. It went underground. It moved beneath his awareness. It waited beneath his routine. It hid beneath his control. It stayed beneath the part of him that needed to believe he had moved on. And now it is rising again. This is when the divine masculine may begin asking the questions he avoided for so long. Was I really over this? Or did I just stop feeling it? Did I heal? Or did I disconnect? Did I find peace? Or did I become numb enough to survive the absence? These questions can be painful because they expose how convincing numbness can be. Numbness can look like closure from the outside. It can look like strength. It can look like emotional control. It can look like someone who is unaffected, someone who has accepted things, someone who has moved forward. But inside, numbness is often only frozen feeling. And frozen feeling can thaw. That is what begins to happen here. The feeling thaws. At first, he may resist it. He may not want to admit that something still matters. He may not want to face the possibility that his distance was not emotional freedom, but avoidance. He may feel frustrated that the connection still has an echo inside him. He may feel embarrassed that he is remembering. He may even feel angry at himself for caring after he worked so hard to appear untouched. But the heart does not measure truth by pride. The heart knows what still lives. And when the heart begins to speak again, it may reveal that what he called moving on was actually a carefully maintained silence. A silence around the grief. A silence around the longing. A silence around the tenderness. A silence around the regret. A silence around the truth that he was never as unaffected as he appeared. This can be one of the most humbling stages of the journey, because now he has to face not only the connection, but his own self-deception. He has to face the fact that he may have used distance to avoid emotional accountability. He may have used logic to dismiss what his soul still knew. He may have used busyness to silence the ache. He may have used pride to avoid admitting that something had touched him deeply. And now all of that begins to feel less convincing. He may still try to say, "It is nothing." But the feeling says otherwise. He may still try to say, "I am fine." But the heaviness in his chest does not agree. He may still try to say, "That chapter is closed." But the memory keeps opening the page. This is how he begins to realize he was not over it. Because closure brings peace. But numbness brings delay. Closure allows him to remember without needing to escape. Numbness only helps him avoid the memory until the avoidance becomes too exhausting to maintain. Closure softens the past. Numbness freezes it. Closure releases the emotional charge. Numbness hides it beneath control. And when numbness begins to break, the emotional charge returns. Not always in the same form. Not always as intense as it once was. Not always as romantic longing alone. Sometimes it returns as sadness. Sometimes as regret. Sometimes as tenderness. Sometimes as curiosity. Sometimes as the painful awareness that he did not honor something when it was alive in front of him. That awareness can hurt, because he may begin to see the difference between letting go and shutting down. Letting go is conscious. Shutting down is survival. Letting go brings acceptance. Shutting down brings numbness. Letting go says, "I have felt this fully, and now I release it with truth." Shutting down says, "I cannot feel this, so I will bury it and call that peace." And for a long time, he may have confused the two. This is why the return of feeling can feel like a crisis. It forces him to admit that he may not have processed the emotional truth at all. He only avoided it long enough to function. He only numbed himself long enough to regain control. He only placed the connection in a locked room inside himself and stopped visiting that room. But locked rooms are not empty. They hold what was left inside. And now the door is opening. This is where he may begin to remember not only what happened, but what he felt while it was happening. The warmth, the softness, the recognition, the way his heart responded before fear interrupted. The way your presence reached something in him he did not know how to protect. The way the connection made him feel more alive, more exposed, more human. He may realize that he did not forget. He only stopped allowing himself to remember honestly. And that is different. Because honest memory does not only replay events. It reopens meaning. It asks, what did this show me? What did I refuse to feel? What did I run from? What did I call closure because I was too afraid to grieve? What did I lose when I chose numbness over truth? These questions can become the beginning of awakening. Not because they are easy, but because they are honest. And honesty is the first real break from numbness. The divine masculine may begin to see that being over it would have felt different. If he were truly over it, the memory would not carry the same weight. The silence would not feel charged. The distance would not still contain an ache. The connection would not return through dreams, through songs, through the quiet moments when his defenses are tired. If he were truly over it, he could remember without needing to harden. But if remembering still makes him defend, distract, shut down, or ache, then something remains unfinished. And unfinished does not always mean the relationship must return. It means the feeling must be faced. That is important. Realizing he was not over it does not automatically mean he is ready to come forward. It does not automatically mean he knows what he wants. It does not automatically mean he has the maturity to communicate clearly or repair what was broken. Sometimes this realization begins quietly inside him, long before it becomes action. He may simply become more reflective, more still, more aware, more emotionally unsettled, more unable to dismiss what he once dismissed, more honest with himself in private, even if he has not yet found the courage to be honest outwardly. This private honesty matters, because the first lie he has to stop telling is the lie he tells himself. The lie that it meant nothing. The lie that he felt nothing. The lie that distance healed him. The lie that numbness was strength. The lie that the heart can be silenced forever without consequence. When those lies begin to collapse, the truth has room to rise. And the truth may be simple but heavy. I was not over it. I was numb. I buried this because I did not know how to hold it. I called it peace because I was afraid of what I would feel if I stopped running. That kind of admission can break the old armor. Because now he is no longer hiding behind the illusion that avoidance worked. He begins to understand that his emotional body has been waiting for him to stop running, waiting for him to listen, waiting for him to admit that the feelings he buried were not weaknesses. They were unresolved truths. And unresolved truths do not disappear through silence. They return when the soul is ready. This is why he may feel sadness in this chapter. Not only sadness about the connection, sadness about himself. Sadness that he abandoned his own heart. Sadness that he did not know how to stay open. Sadness that he confused numbness with strength. Sadness that he may have pushed away something meaningful because he did not know how to feel without fear. That sadness can become sacred if he allows it. Because sadness can soften what pride kept hard. Sadness can reveal what mattered. Sadness can lead him into humility. And humility may be exactly what his awakening needs. Because pride may have helped him maintain the image, but humility helps him meet the truth. Pride says, I am fine. Humility says, I am still affected. Pride says, it did not matter. Humility says, I was too afraid to admit that it did. Pride says, I moved on. Humility asks, or did I only go numb? That question changes everything. Because once he sees the difference, he can no longer use numbness as proof of healing. He can no longer assume that emotional silence means emotional completion. He can no longer trust the old defense without questioning what it is hiding. And this may lead him into a deeper confrontation. If I was not over it, what do I do now? That question may scare him. Because feeling the truth is one thing. Acting with maturity is another. He may need to grieve. He may need to apologize. He may need to communicate. He may need to forgive himself. He may need to accept that some things cannot be undone, only understood. He may need to become a man who no longer abandons his own feelings when they become inconvenient. This is where healing becomes more than emotion. It becomes responsibility. Because it is not enough to realize he was numb. He must decide whether he will return to numbness or walk forward into emotional honesty. He must decide whether he will use the returning feelings as a doorway into growth or as another reason to shut down again. He must decide whether he will let the truth humble him enough to change. That choice belongs to him. And for you, this chapter carries a powerful reminder. If he realizes he was not over it, that does not mean you must stop your life and wait. His realization may be real, but your peace is real too. His thawing emotions may be sacred, but your boundaries are sacred too. His private awakening may matter, but it must become mature action before it can become trust. Do not confuse his emotional return with emotional readiness. A man can realize he still feels something and still not know how to love well. He can miss you and still be afraid. He can regret and still not repair. He can awaken to the truth and still need to learn how to live from it. So stay compassionate, but stay grounded. Let his realization belong to him. Let him feel what he numbed. Let him face what he buried. Let him understand what distance did not heal. Let him discover the difference between closure and shutdown. But do not make yourself responsible for proving that the connection mattered. If it mattered, his soul will show him. If he was numb, the thawing will reveal it. If the truth remains, it will meet him in the quiet places he can no longer escape. And your task is not to force that moment. Your task is to remain faithful to your own heart. Because sometimes his realization that he was not over it becomes part of his awakening. And sometimes your realization that you deserve more than someone's delayed feelings becomes part of yours. Both can be true. This is the deeper wisdom. His numbness breaking may show him the truth of what he still feels. Your healing may show you the truth of what you still need. His heart may be waking up. Your self-worth may be rising too. And neither awakening should require you to abandon yourself. That is the sacred balance. Because love is not only about whether feelings remain. Love is about whether those feelings become honest, responsible, consistent, and brave enough to be lived in the open. That is why realizing he was not over it is only a doorway, not the destination. The doorway opens when he admits that numbness was not healing. The destination begins when he chooses to face, process, communicate, and grow from what has returned. Until then, the realization is powerful, but incomplete. Still, it matters. Because the moment he realizes he was not over it, he is no longer as lost in the old illusion. He can no longer pretend the numbness was peace without feeling the lie inside it. He can no longer call himself untouched when something in him is clearly still responding. He can no longer reduce the connection to nothing if the memory continues to carry meaning. And when denial loses power, healing has a chance. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 4. The divine masculine realizes he was not over it when the feelings he numbed begin to return with enough honesty to break the old story. He sees that distance was not closure, silence was not healing, and emotional control was not freedom. What he called moving on may have only been the temporary quiet of a heart that had not yet felt what it needed to feel. And when he finally understands that, the next layer begins. Because beneath the realization that he was not over it, there is often grief. Grief for what he lost. Grief for what he denied. Grief for the love he did not know how to receive. Grief for the man he had to become just to survive without feeling. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 5. Because next we are going deeper into the grief beneath his control. And why the feelings he can no longer numb may reveal not only what he lost, but the parts of himself he has been missing all along. Chapter 5. The grief beneath his control. Beneath his control, there may be grief. That is where this chapter begins. Because when the divine masculine can no longer numb his feelings, what rises is not always simple longing. It is not always a clear confession. It is not always the sudden realization that he wants to return, reach out, or make everything right. Sometimes what rises first is grief. A grief he has carried for longer than he knows. a grief he buried under discipline, a grief he hid beneath silence, a grief he disguised as control, a grief that was never truly gone, only waiting beneath the surface of the man who kept telling himself he was fine. And this grief can shock him, because he may have expected anger. He may have expected confusion. He may have expected desire. He may have expected missing someone. But he may not have expected sadness this deep. The sadness of realizing that he has not only lost a connection. He may have lost contact with parts of himself for years. He may have lost tenderness, lost softness, lost emotional honesty, lost the ability to feel without immediately protecting, denying, rationalizing, or shutting down. That is why this stage is so powerful. Because the grief beneath his control is not only about you. It is about him. It is about the man he became in order not to feel. The heart he silenced in order to function. The softness he abandoned in order to appear strong. The love he could not receive because receiving love required openness. The truth he kept pushing away because truth would have asked him to change. And when numbness breaks, all of that begins to rise. At first, he may not know what to do with it. He may feel heavy without understanding why. He may become quieter, more reflective, more emotionally distant in a different way. Not cold now, but burdened. He may stare into space. He may lose interest in distractions that used to work. He may feel the ache of memory in his body before he can put language to it. And the question inside him may be, why does this hurt so much now? Why now? Why after all this time? Why after I thought I had control? Why after I told myself I was past it? Why does something I buried still feel alive enough to break me open? Because grief does not follow the schedule of the ego. Grief follows the readiness of the soul. And sometimes the soul waits until the man is strong enough, quiet enough, tired enough, or honest enough to finally feel what he could not feel before. That is why grief may arrive later. It does not always come when the loss happens. Sometimes when the loss happens, he is too defended, too proud, too overwhelmed, too afraid of collapse. So he controls. He goes silent. He moves forward. He acts unaffected. He chooses distance, work, logic, or numbness because feeling the grief in real time would have required more emotional capacity than he had. So the grief waits. It waits beneath the routine. It waits beneath the performance. It waits beneath the image of strength. It waits beneath the story that says, it did not affect me that much. But when numbness begins to break, grief returns to collect the truth. And the truth may be painful. He may grieve what he did not say. He may grieve how he pulled away. He may grieve the tenderness he minimized. He may grieve the connection he could not hold. He may grieve the way fear made choices his heart never fully agreed with. This is the grief of recognition. Recognizing that control protected him, but it also cost him. It cost him intimacy. It cost him honesty. It cost him emotional closeness. It cost him the chance to be seen while something real was still alive in front of him. And this can create a grief that feels heavier than ordinary sadness. Because it is not only the grief of losing someone. It is the grief of realizing he was involved in the loss. That is a difficult truth for the divine masculine to face. It is easier to say, it just did not work. It is harder to say, I was afraid. It is easier to say, the timing was wrong. It is harder to say, I used timing as a shield. It is easier to say, I needed space. It is harder to say, I disappeared because I did not know how to feel. And grief often begins when the excuses stop feeling strong enough. When the reasons no longer fully protect him. When the old narrative loses its power. When the soul starts asking for a more honest explanation. Not to punish him, but to wake him. Because grief has a way of humbling the masculine ego. It says, look at what mattered. Look at what you avoided. Look at what your silence cost. Look at the tenderness you pushed away because you were afraid to need it. Look at the love you tried to reduce because receiving it would have made you vulnerable. These are not easy truths, but they may be necessary ones. Because until he grieves, he may keep controlling. Until he feels the pain beneath the control, he may keep believing the control was wisdom. until he mourns what numbness cost him. He may keep returning to numbness every time feeling becomes too much. That is why grief becomes a doorway. It shows him the price of emotional avoidance. And that price may be his own heart. He may begin to see that every time he shut down, something inside him became smaller. Every time he chose pride over honesty, a part of him stayed alone. Every time he ran from tenderness, he reinforced the belief that love was unsafe. Every time he pretended he was fine, he moved farther away from the truth that could have healed him. And now, feeling returns with the weight of all that distance. This is not only grief for a person. It is grief for the self he abandoned. The self that wanted to speak. The self that wanted to stay. The self that wanted to be held in truth. The self that knew the connection mattered, but was silenced by fear. The self that could have loved more honestly if he had known how. That self may begin to call him back. And when it does, he may feel sadness for the years he spent believing emotional control was the same as maturity. He may grieve the fact that he learned to be strong by becoming less reachable. He may grieve the moments where he needed tenderness but chose hardness. He may grieve the times when love came close and he pushed it away because closeness felt like danger. This grief can become very deep because it is ancestral. It is personal. It is emotional. It is spiritual. It may carry the weight of everything he was taught not to feel, everything he swallowed, everything he denied, everything he turned into silence because he did not want to look weak, everything he pretended did not matter because admitting it mattered would have opened a wound. And when those wounds begin opening, the old mask may tremble. He may begin to feel sadness in places where he used to feel nothing. He may feel compassion for himself, but also regret. He may feel tenderness for the connection, but also sorrow for how he handled it. He may feel the ache of wanting to go back, not necessarily to recreate the past, but to meet it differently. To say what he did not say. To stay where he ran. To soften where he hardened. To choose honesty where he chose control. But life does not always offer the past back in the same form. And this realization may deepen the grief. Because he may begin to understand that some moments cannot be recovered by finally feeling them later. Some doors close. Some people move on. Some versions of the connection change because silence had consequences. Some tenderness, once unprotected, cannot simply be restored by regret alone. This is why grief can become sacred. It teaches him that love must be honored while it is alive, not only remembered after fear has pushed it away. It teaches him that silence is not neutral when another heart is involved. It teaches him that control can protect his ego while injuring the connection. It teaches him that numbness may keep him from feeling pain immediately, but it may also delay the pain until it becomes grief mixed with regret. That mixture is powerful. Grief says, "This mattered." Regret says, "I did not know how to honor it." And together, they can begin changing him. If he is willing. Because grief can either close him further or open him deeper. If he resists it, he may become bitter. He may blame. He may harden again. He may decide that feeling hurts too much and return to numbness with even more force. He may use the grief as proof that love is dangerous. But if he listens to it, grief can mature him. It can make him more honest, more humble, more emotionally responsible, more aware of the impact of his silence, more capable of protecting tenderness the next time it appears. This is the difference between grief that becomes a wound and grief that becomes wisdom. A wound says, "Never open again." Wisdom says, "Open with more truth next time." A wound says, "Love made me suffer." Wisdom says, "Fear kept me from loving well." A wound says, "I should numb this." Wisdom says, "I need to understand what this pain is teaching me." That is the sacred choice. Because the grief beneath his control is not here only to make him suffer. It is here to show him where control has replaced connection, where fear has replaced honesty, where the masculine mask has replaced the living heart, where survival patterns have kept him from becoming the man he was meant to be. And if he lets grief teach him, he may begin to see masculinity differently. Not as emotional hardness, but as emotional courage. Not as the ability to feel nothing, but as the ability to feel pain and still remain truthful. Not as the need to control every vulnerable moment, but as the strength to protect what is sacred by being present with it. That is awakened masculine energy. It does not run from grief. It lets grief refine the heart. It lets grief reveal the places where he has been unconscious. It lets grief soften the arrogance of the ego. It lets grief turn regret into responsibility. It lets grief become the river that carries him back to the truth of himself. Because beneath the grief there is often love. Not always love that knows what to do. Not always love that can return in the same way. Not always love that automatically becomes reconciliation. But love as a force of recognition. Love that says, this mattered. Love that says, I was touched. Love that says, I was not as numb as I pretended. Love that says, something in me wanted to be open, but I did not know how. That admission can break him open. But sometimes being broken open is how the heart begins to breathe. He may cry when no one sees. He may sit in silence and finally feel the weight. He may remember the softness and feel his chest tighten. He may replay the moment he chose distance and finally understand what that distance cost. This is not weakness. This is truth returning to the body. The tears he may have resisted are not proof that he is less masculine. They are proof that the numbness is breaking. The heaviness he feels is not proof that he is failing. It is proof that the heart is thawing. The grief he carries is not punishment. It is the emotional truth asking to be integrated. And integration means he does not use grief to stay stuck. He uses it to become more honest. He begins to ask, what did I avoid? What did I deny? What did my silence protect me from? What did my control cost me? What kind of man do I want to become now that I can feel the cost? These questions are not easy, but they are the beginning of accountability. And accountability is where grief becomes healing. Because if he only feels grief but refuses responsibility, he may stay trapped in pain. But if he allows grief to show him how he participated in his own emotional disconnection, then he can begin to change the pattern. He can begin to communicate sooner. He can begin to stop disappearing when he is overwhelmed. He can begin to honor tenderness instead of shaming it. He can begin to tell the truth before silence becomes damage. He can begin to see love not as something to control, but something to meet with presence. That is how grief becomes a teacher. It teaches him that the heart cannot be neglected forever. It teaches him that what is buried will eventually ask to be felt. It teaches him that control without emotional honesty creates loneliness. It teaches him that being strong enough to grieve is part of becoming strong enough to love. For you, this chapter carries its own message. If he is grieving beneath the surface, you may feel it. You may sense the heaviness, the regret, the emotional return. You may feel that something inside him is finally recognizing what he avoided. But remember this. His grief is not the same as readiness. His sadness is not the same as repair. His regret is not the same as changed behavior. A man can grieve what he lost and still not know how to rebuild trust. He can feel sorrow and still not have the courage to communicate. He can understand the cost of control and still need to learn how to live differently. So let his grief belong to him. Do not rush in to rescue him from the pain that may be teaching him. Do not make yourself responsible for soothing the regret he must learn from. Do not mistake his emotional heaviness for the full maturity required to love you well. Compassion is beautiful, but self-abandonment is not love. You can honor his process while still honoring your own. You can understand that grief is rising beneath his control while still requiring honesty, consistency, and emotional responsibility. You can recognize that he may be waking up without making your life pause until he knows what to do with the awakening. Because your healing matters too. Maybe he is grieving the love he did not know how to receive. And maybe you are learning not to give your love to someone who can only recognize its value after distance. Maybe he is grieving his silence. And maybe you are learning to choose spaces where your heart does not have to beg for words. Maybe he is grieving the tenderness he pushed away. And maybe you are learning that your tenderness deserves to be protected in real time, not only mourned in hindsight. That is sacred wisdom. It does not make you bitter. It makes you awake. Because love must be more than regret after loss. Love must become presence while it is here. Love must become courage before the door closes. Love must become truth before silence turns into grief. That is the lesson for both souls. For him, the grief beneath his control reveals what he avoided. For you, it may reveal what you will no longer abandon in yourself. And this is where the chapter finds its deeper light. Grief is not the ending if it becomes honesty. Grief is not failure if it becomes growth. Grief is not weakness if it becomes the place where the heart finally stops pretending. The divine masculine can emerge from this stage more whole if he allows the grief to soften him instead of harden him. If he lets it teach him how to honor feeling. If he lets it show him that control is not love, silence is not peace, and numbness is not healing. He may not be able to change the past, but he can let the past change him. That is the miracle hidden inside grief. Not that it brings back what was lost exactly as it was, but that it returns him to the truth of what mattered. So he no longer has to live as a man divided from his own heart. And when a man finally feels the grief beneath his control, something sacred can happen. The mask begins to lose its power. The heart begins to speak more clearly. The soul begins to reclaim what numbness tried to bury. And the man who once believed control was strength begins to understand that true strength is the courage to feel, to learn, and to love with more honesty than before. That is where Chapter 5 leaves us. With the understanding that beneath his control may be grief, grief for the connection, grief for the silence, grief for what fear cost him, and grief for the parts of himself he abandoned in order to appear strong. But if he has the courage to feel it, that grief can become a doorway into humility, accountability, and a more awakened masculine heart. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 6. Because next we are going deeper into why feeling again can make him pull back even more, and why the return of emotion may frighten him before it finally frees him. Chapter 6. Why feeling again can make him pull back even more. Sometimes, when the divine masculine begins to feel again, he does not immediately move closer. Sometimes he pulls back even more. That is where this chapter begins. Because from the outside, this can feel impossible to understand. If his numbness is breaking, why does he become more distant? If the buried feelings are returning, why does he not finally speak? If grief is rising beneath his control, why does he not come forward with honesty, tenderness, or confession? Why would a man who is beginning to feel again seem even harder to reach? Because feeling again can terrify a man who survived by not feeling. That is the hidden truth. When the divine masculine has lived behind numbness for a long time, emotion does not always feel like relief at first. It can feel like invasion, like the inner world is becoming too loud, like the heart is opening before he feels ready, like something he buried is rising with more power than he knows how to contain. And when that happens, his first instinct may not be surrender. His first instinct may be protection. He may pull back. He may go quiet. He may become colder. He may act more controlled. He may return to distractions with even more intensity. He may try to rebuild the wall the moment he realizes it is cracking. Not because the feelings are fake, because the feelings are frightening. This is one of the deepest paradoxes of emotional awakening. The return of feeling is healing. But before it feels like healing, it may feel like danger. Because numbness once gave him distance from pain. It helped him keep going. It helped him avoid collapse. It helped him remain functional, composed, and unreadable. It allowed him to bypass grief, longing, regret, tenderness, and vulnerability. So when those feelings begin coming back, his system may not say, "Finally, I am healing." His system may say, "Something is wrong. I am losing control." That is why he may pull away even more when he starts feeling again. He is not only feeling the connection. He is feeling the fear of feeling the connection. He is not only feeling longing. He is feeling the panic that longing might mean he is no longer detached. He is not only feeling grief. He is feeling the terror that if he allows the grief to move through him, it may break the image he has worked so hard to maintain. This is where his emotional world becomes complicated. Because one part of him may be tired of numbness, tired of pretending, tired of living behind the mask, tired of carrying feelings in a locked room inside his chest. But another part of him may be terrified of what will happen if the door opens fully. What if everything comes out? What if the sadness is too much? What if the longing does not stop? What if he realizes he made choices he cannot undo? What if feeling again forces him to become someone different? These questions can create fear. And fear can create distance. He may distance himself from you. He may distance himself from the memory. He may distance himself from his own heart. He may distance himself from anything that makes the emotion rise too clearly. Because when a man is not used to feeling, even tenderness can feel overwhelming. Even love can feel like pressure. Even regret can feel like too much truth at once. This is why he may seem to disappear right when something inside him is beginning to wake up. You may sense that his energy has shifted. You may feel that something is stirring beneath the surface. You may notice that he is not as numb as before, not as indifferent as he appears, not as free from the connection as he once tried to seem. But instead of coming forward, he becomes more guarded. And this can hurt. Because you may think, if he feels it, why is he hiding? If he misses me, why is he silent? If his heart is waking up, why does he seem even farther away? Because awakening does not always look like approach. Sometimes awakening first looks like resistance. The soul rises. The ego panics. The heart opens. The defense system tightens. The feeling returns. The old mask tries to reassert control. And for a while, the defense may become stronger because it senses it is losing power. This is important. Sometimes the wall gets higher right before it begins to fall. Not because the wall is winning, but because the wall is afraid. His numbness may be cracking, and the old self may be doing everything it can to repair it. It may tell him to stay away from anything that makes him feel too deeply. It may tell him not to reach out, not to look back, not to admit the ache, not to sit in silence too long, not to let one memory become a doorway into everything he has avoided. So he pulls back, and the pullback may be his attempt to regain the numbness he is losing. He may think, I need to get myself together. But what he may really mean is, I need to stop feeling this much. He may think, I need space. But what he may really mean is, the feeling is getting too close. He may think, I should not open that door. But what he may really mean is, if I open that door, I may have to face the truth. That is why feeling again can make him retreat. Because emotion asks for integration. And integration asks for courage. It is not enough to feel. He must learn how to hold what he feels without running from it. He must learn how to let sadness move without drowning in it. He must learn how to let longing speak without turning it into shame. He must learn how to let regret teach him without collapsing into self-punishment. That is not easy for a man who has lived through control. So he may resist the return of feeling as if it were an enemy. But the feelings are not enemies. They are messengers. The sadness may be saying, something mattered. The longing may be saying, something remains alive. The regret may be saying, there is a lesson here. The tenderness may be saying, your heart is not dead. The grief may be saying, you are ready to release what you could not face before. But if he does not know how to interpret these messengers, he may experience them as threats. And when something feels threatening, he moves away from it. This is why he may avoid places, songs, conversations, or moments that remind him of what he is trying not to feel. He may avoid emotional conversations, avoid vulnerability, avoid checking in with himself, avoid any silence that brings the truth too close. He may even avoid you, not because you are the problem, but because your presence represents the place where the numbness cannot survive. That can be very painful to understand, because you may have been the softness that helped his heart wake up. You may have been the mirror that showed him what he had buried. You may have been the connection that made him feel alive after a long season of emotional distance. But if he is not ready to hold what you awaken, he may associate your presence with overwhelm. Not because your love is wrong, but because his system is unpracticed at receiving it. That is the wound. The very thing that could help him heal may first activate the fear that makes him run. This is why emotional awakening requires maturity. Without maturity, feeling becomes reaction. He feels longing, so he disappears. He feels grief, so he shuts down. He feels regret, so he distracts. He feels tenderness, so he hardens. He feels vulnerability, so he calls it confusion. But with maturity, feeling becomes awareness. He feels longing and asks what it means. He feels grief and allows himself to process it. He feels regret and turns it into accountability. He feels tenderness and stops shaming it. He feels vulnerability and chooses not to run from it immediately. That is the difference between a man being awakened by his emotions and a man being ruled by his fear of them. And in this chapter, he may be standing between both. He is beginning to feel, but he is not yet fully ready to trust feeling. He is beginning to thaw, but he may still miss the false safety of being frozen. He is beginning to hear the heart, but the ego is still telling him that the heart is dangerous. That is why his behavior can become confusing in this stage. He may seem more emotional, yet more distant. More affected, yet more guarded. More aware, yet more silent. More restless, yet less willing to explain himself. Because he is not numb anymore. But he is not free yet. He is in the in-between. And the in-between can be unstable. This is the place where he can no longer fully return to numbness. But he has not yet learned how to live openly in feeling. The old coping strategies do not work like they used to. But the new emotional maturity has not been fully built yet. So he may swing between wanting to face the truth and wanting to escape it. One day, he may feel ready to look inward. The next day, he may run back into distraction. One moment, he may feel regret. The next moment, he may minimize everything. One part of him may want to reach out. Another part may tell him that reaching out will make him too vulnerable. This is not peace. It is transition. And transition can look messy. But if he is willing, this messy place can become sacred. Because feeling again is not the problem. The problem is believing he must numb himself to survive feeling. That belief is what must break. He must learn that emotions are not storms sent to destroy him. They are waves that move when they are allowed. He must learn that grief does not make him weak. It makes him honest. He must learn that longing does not mean he has lost power. It means something in him is still capable of connection. He must learn that tenderness is not a threat to masculinity. It is a sign that the masculine heart is still alive. But this learning takes humility. It takes him admitting that his old way of coping is no longer enough. It takes him saying to himself, I cannot keep numbing this. I cannot keep running from every feeling. I cannot keep calling avoidance strength. I cannot keep confusing emotional shutdown with peace. That is a difficult admission, because it means the old identity must change. And the old identity may fight hard. It may say, you were safer numb. But the soul will answer, you were not safer. You were disconnected. It may say, feeling will break you. But the soul will answer, feeling is what will return you to yourself. It may say, do not go back into the heart. But the soul will answer, the heart is where your healing begins. That is the sacred battle of this chapter. And for a while, he may not know which voice to follow. This is why you may need to be very clear in your own heart. Because if he pulls back even more when feelings return, you might be tempted to chase. You might think, he is finally feeling it. Maybe if I just show him more love, he will stop running. You might want to soothe him, reassure him, explain the connection, help him make sense of what is rising. But this is not your work to carry for him. His feelings are returning to him. Not to you. They are asking him to become conscious. They are asking him to develop emotional responsibility. They are asking him to stop using numbness as a hiding place. They are asking him to learn how to be present with himself before he can be truly present with anyone else. You can hold compassion, but you cannot become his emotional nervous system. You can understand the fear, but you cannot make his fear disappear by abandoning your own needs. You can love him, but you cannot do the inner work he is being called to do. That is the boundary. Because if you chase him every time he retreats from his own feelings, You may unintentionally protect him from the consequence of his avoidance. You may become the one who reaches, explains, repairs, and carries the emotional weight, while he continues to pull away whenever feeling becomes too much. That is not healing. That is a pattern. And your soul deserves better than becoming a pattern inside someone else's fear. So let him meet the feelings that are returning. Let him sit with the discomfort. Let him notice the emptiness of numbness. Let him realize that pulling back does not erase the emotion. Let him discover that the heart he is trying to avoid is his own. Because sometimes the distance he creates is where he finally hears himself. Sometimes the silence he chooses becomes the place where truth becomes louder. Sometimes the feelings he tries to run from follow him until he can no longer pretend they belong to someone else. That is how awakening works. It brings the truth home. And when the truth comes home, he must decide what kind of man he wants to be. Will he be the man who feels and disappears? Or the man who feels and learns? Will he be the man who numbs every ache? Or the man who asks what the ache is teaching him? Will he be the man who pulls back from the heart? Or the man who finally understands that the heart is not his enemy? This is the turning point. Because feeling again may make him pull back at first, but it does not have to keep him there. The pullback can become another cycle of avoidance. Or it can become the mirror that shows him how afraid he still is of his own emotional life. And if he is brave enough to look into that mirror, something begins to change. He may still be afraid, but he becomes aware of the fear. He may still need space, but he learns not to use space as a way to disappear. He may still feel overwhelmed, but he begins to understand that overwhelm is not a command to run. It is a signal to slow down, breathe, and become present. That is emotional maturity. Not never feeling too much, but learning how to stay with yourself when feeling returns. And that is what the divine masculine is being invited into. A new relationship with his emotions. A new relationship with vulnerability. A new relationship with the parts of himself he once numbed. A new relationship with love, not as something to survive, but as something to meet with presence. This is where real strength begins. Not in the ability to stay numb, but in the courage to feel and remain honest. Not in the ability to pull back, but in the willingness to understand why he pulls back. Not in the ability to control every emotion, but in the wisdom to let emotion move without letting fear control his choices. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 6. Feeling again can make him pull back even more because the return of emotion can overwhelm the parts of him that have survived through numbness. His first response may be resistance, distance, or renewed control. But the feelings are not returning to destroy him. They are returning to show him where he has been absent from himself. And if he listens, they can free him. They can teach him that sadness is not weakness. That longing is not failure. That tenderness is not danger. That grief is not the end. That feeling deeply is not a threat to his masculinity. It is the path back to his soul. And for you, let this chapter remind you. Do not blame yourself if he pulls back when his feelings return. You are not too much because your presence awakens what he has not learned to hold. You are not wrong because your connection touches places in him that still fear vulnerability. You are not responsible for making him feel safe enough to feel. That work belongs to him. Your work is to stay rooted in your own truth. To love without chasing. To understand without excusing endless distance. To hold compassion without surrendering your peace. To remember that his emotional awakening is sacred, but so is your emotional safety. Because the return of his feelings may be part of his healing. But your refusal to abandon yourself is part of yours. That is where Chapter 6 leaves us. With the understanding that when the divine masculine begins to feel again, he may first pull back even more because feeling threatens the numbness that once protected him. But if he becomes conscious, that pullback can reveal the exact place where his healing must begin. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 7. Because next we are going deeper into the battle between the old mask and the awakened heart. And why the part of him that wants to stay numb may begin fighting the part of him that is finally ready to feel the truth. Chapter 7. The battle between the old mask and the awakened heart. There comes a moment when the divine masculine is no longer fighting the connection. He is fighting himself. That is where this chapter begins. Because when he can no longer numb his feelings, two parts of him begin to collide. One part wants to return to the old way, the old silence, the old control, the old emotional distance, the old identity that knew how to survive by feeling less, revealing less, needing less, and pretending that nothing touched him deeply. But another part of him is waking up. A part that wants truth. A part that wants softness. A part that wants to stop running. A part that is tired of pretending. A part that knows numbness is no longer peace. This is the battle between the old mask and the awakened heart. And it can be one of the most confusing stages of his journey. Because from the outside, he may look inconsistent. One moment, he may seem reflective, softer, more aware, more emotionally affected than before. You may feel that something in him has shifted. You may sense that the numbness is breaking, that the old distance is not as convincing, that the feelings he buried are beginning to reach the surface. And then suddenly the mask returns. He becomes controlled again. He becomes distant again. He becomes hard to read again. He acts as if the feeling did not touch him. He retreats back into the version of himself that looks safe, familiar, and emotionally untouchable. And you may wonder, which one is real? The softened man, or the guarded man? The heart that seems to be waking up, or the mask that keeps coming back? The truth is, both may be present. But they are not both his future. The mask is his survival. The heart is his awakening. The mask is what he learned to wear. The heart is who he is trying to remember. The mask says, stay numb. Stay safe. Do not let the feeling reach you. The awakened heart says, feel this. Understand this. Let this bring you back to yourself. That is the inner conflict. And it can become exhausting for him. Because the old mask has history. It has years of practice. It knows how to hide. It knows how to shut down. It knows how to make distance sound reasonable. It knows how to turn fear into logic. It knows how to say, I am fine, even when something inside him is breaking open. The awakened heart is newer, softer, less practiced. It does not always know how to speak yet. It may only arrive as a feeling, a memory, a heaviness, a longing, a sudden tenderness he does not know how to explain. It may not have the language that the mask has. It may not know how to defend itself against pride, shame, and old conditioning. But it is real. And it is rising. That is why the battle becomes so intense. Because the old mask does not want to die. It may know that if the heart becomes fully awake, the old life cannot remain the same. The old identity cannot remain unquestioned. The old patterns cannot continue without consequence. The old story that says, I do not feel, I do not need, I do not care, I do not get affected, can no longer survive the return of emotional truth. So the mask fights. It fights through silence. It fights through denial. It fights through distraction. It fights through emotional distance. It fights through the urge to minimize what he feels. It fights through the temptation to call awakening confusion. This is important. Sometimes what he calls confusion is actually the battle between the mask and the heart. Because the heart may be clear in its own quiet way. It may know that something matters. It may know that the connection left an imprint. It may know that he has been running from truth. It may know that numbness was never the same as healing. But the mask does not want that clarity. Clarity would require change. Clarity would require honesty. Clarity would require vulnerability. Clarity would require him to admit that the old way of being is no longer enough. So the mask creates fog. It says, maybe this is not real. Maybe this is just emotion. Maybe you are overthinking. Maybe it is safer not to go there. Maybe you should stay busy. Maybe you should not open that door. And for a while he may listen. Because the mask sounds protective. But protection is not always truth. Sometimes protection is fear with a familiar voice. This is where the awakened heart begins to challenge him. It does not shout. It returns. It returns when he is alone. It returns when the distractions fade. It returns through memory. It returns through longing. It returns through the grief he can no longer bury. It returns through the quiet realization that he is tired of being emotionally absent from his own life. And each time it returns, the mask becomes less convincing. He may still wear it, but it no longer feels like home. He may still choose control, but control no longer feels like peace. He may still go silent, but silence no longer feels empty. He may still act numb, but the numbness has cracks now. And through those cracks, the heart keeps speaking. It may say, "You are not fine. You are not free. You are not over it. You are not weak for feeling this. You are not safer because you are hidden. You are only farther away from yourself." That voice can be hard for him to hear, because it exposes the cost of the mask. The mask may have protected him from vulnerability, but it also separated him from intimacy. It may have helped him avoid pain, but it also blocked tenderness. It may have made him appear strong, but it kept him from being honest. It may have helped him function, but it did not help him feel alive. And now the awakened heart is showing him that difference. Functioning is not the same as living. Avoiding pain is not the same as being at peace. Staying in control is not the same as being whole. That realization can shake him, because the divine masculine may begin to see that the mask he trusted is also the prison he has been living inside. He may begin to understand that the same armor that protected him from heartbreak has also protected him from love. The same emotional distance that kept him from being wounded has also kept him from being truly known. And once he sees that, he cannot unsee it. That does not mean he immediately removes the mask. He may still reach for it, especially when feelings become intense, especially when vulnerability rises, especially when memory turns into grief, especially when the awakened heart asks him to become responsible for what he feels. The old mask may say, "Put me back on." And sometimes he will. He may go quiet again. He may act indifferent again. He may bury the feeling again. He may run back into the old performance of being unaffected. But now something is different. He knows it is a performance. Before, the mask felt like identity. Now it begins to feel like avoidance. That is a major turning point. Because healing begins when he can tell the difference between who he is and what he uses to protect himself. The mask is not who he is. The numbness is not who he is. The distance is not who he is. The silence is not who he is. They are strategies. Strategies he may have needed once. Strategies that may have helped him survive when he did not know how else to hold pain. But a strategy is not a soul. And the awakened heart is calling him back to the soul. This is where the battle becomes sacred. Because the mask is trying to preserve the old self. But the heart is trying to birth the real self. The real self may be tender. The real self may feel deeply. The real self may grieve. The real self may need connection. The real self may want love that is honest, safe, and emotionally alive. And the mask fears that real self. Because the real self cannot be fully controlled. The real self cannot be numb forever. The real self cannot keep pretending that emotional truth is weakness. The real self cannot survive on distraction, silence, and distance. The real self wants to breathe. It wants to be known. It wants to stop hiding from the very feelings that make him human. So the question becomes, which self will he choose? Will he choose the mask because it feels familiar? Or will he choose the heart because it feels true? Will he keep calling numbness strength? Or will he learn that strength is the courage to feel? Will he keep hiding behind the version of himself that never needs? Or will he finally meet the part of himself that has been waiting to be loved, healed, and brought back into the light? These questions are not easy, because choosing the heart may require him to face everything the mask helped him avoid. It may require him to face grief, regret, longing, shame, the truth of what he denied, the impact of his silence, the tenderness he pushed away, the fear that made him choose numbness over honesty. That is why awakening can feel so difficult. It does not only bring love, it brings accountability. It brings the pain of seeing where he abandoned himself. It brings the humility of realizing that he may have hurt others while trying to protect himself. It brings the responsibility of deciding whether he will continue the pattern or finally learn from it. And this is where many divine masculines hesitate. Because feeling is one thing. Changing is another. He may feel the heart waking up, but still fear what awakening requires. He may recognize the truth, but still resist the vulnerability of living from it. He may know the mask is no longer working, but still not know who he is without it. That is a real fear. If he has worn the mask for years, removing it can feel like losing identity. Who am I if I am not the controlled one? Who am I if I admit I care? Who am I if I allow myself to grieve? Who am I if I need tenderness? Who am I if I can no longer pretend I am untouched? These questions may feel like death to the ego, but they are birth to the soul. Because the self that dies is not the real self. It is the defended self, the performed self, the disconnected self, the numb self, the self that thought survival was the highest form of strength, and the self that begins to rise is more whole, not weaker, more alive, not less masculine, more honest, not less powerful, more deeply rooted in truth. That is the sacred transformation the awakened heart is trying to lead him into. But again, he must choose. No one can remove the mask for him. You cannot love the mask off his face. You cannot explain his heart awake. You cannot chase him into emotional honesty. You cannot make him choose truth simply because you can see it inside him. He must become willing. He must reach the point where numbness feels more painful than vulnerability, where the mask feels heavier than the truth, where silence feels lonelier than honesty, where the old performance no longer gives him enough relief to keep pretending. That point may come slowly, through memory, through grief, through longing, through the failure of distractions, through the realization that his feelings are not going away, through the exhaustion of being divided against himself. And when that point comes, he may begin to take the first real steps. Not dramatic steps. Honest steps. He may stop lying to himself. He may allow himself to feel without immediately numbing. He may begin to name what he once avoided. He may admit that the mask is not peace. He may recognize that his heart has been trying to save him, not weaken him. That is the beginning of integration. Integration means the divine masculine does not have to choose between strength and feeling. He learns that true strength includes feeling. He does not have to choose between protection and openness. He learns that healthy boundaries are different from emotional walls. He does not have to choose between masculinity and tenderness. He learns that tenderness is part of the deepest masculine power when it is held with maturity. This is where the awakened heart becomes stronger. Not louder, stronger. It begins to stand inside him with more authority. It says, I do not want to be numb anymore. I do not want to call loneliness independence. I do not want to keep abandoning myself to look strong. I do not want to keep running from the very feelings that are trying to heal me. And when that voice becomes stronger than the mask, the battle begins to shift. He may still feel fear, but fear is no longer the only leader. He may still have the instinct to shut down, but now he can witness it. He may still want to reach for numbness, but now he knows what numbness costs. That awareness is everything, because awareness gives him choice. And choice is where awakening becomes real. Before awareness, he repeats. After awareness, he can respond. Before awareness, the mask acts automatically. After awareness, he can ask, is this really protecting me, or is it keeping me from healing? That question can change the direction of his life. Because once he questions the mask, he begins to reclaim power from it. And that is when the divine masculine starts becoming emotionally free. Not free because he feels nothing. Free because he no longer has to hide from what he feels. Not free because he never grieves. Free because grief no longer means collapse. Not free because he never needs love. Free because needing love no longer feels like shame. This is the freedom the awakened heart is trying to give him. A freedom deeper than numbness. A freedom beyond control. A freedom that comes from finally being able to live in truth. For you, this chapter carries a sacred reminder. If you can feel the battle inside him, do not make it your battlefield. You may sense his heart. You may see the mask. You may feel the contradiction between who he is underneath and how he behaves on the surface. You may know that something in him is waking up, even while another part is still resisting. But you cannot fight that war for him. And you should not lose yourself trying. Because his mask may be loud, but your soul needs peace. His heart may be awakening, but your heart still deserves consistency. His battle may be sacred, but your life cannot become a waiting room for his integration. That is important. You can hold compassion for the man behind the mask. But you must also be honest about the behavior of the man still wearing it. You can recognize the awakened heart beneath his defenses. But you must not build your life around potential that has not become action. You can understand that he is divided. But you do not have to become divided too. Stay whole. Stay rooted. Stay in your own truth. Because the deepest love is not the love that sacrifices itself to rescue someone from their mask. The deepest love is the love that honors truth on both sides. His truth may be that he is awakening. Your truth may be that you need emotional maturity, not only hidden feelings. His truth may be that the heart is rising. Your truth may be that a rising heart must eventually become responsible action. His truth may be that he is fighting the old mask. Your truth may be that you are not here to be wounded by the mask while waiting for the heart to win. Both truths matter. And if the connection is meant to evolve, it must evolve through honesty, not only energy. Through maturity, not only longing. Through choices, not only feelings. Through the courage to remove the mask, not only the pain of wearing it. That is the deeper message. Because the divine masculine's awakened heart is powerful. But it must become embodied. It must show up. It must speak truth. It must take responsibility. It must learn how to feel without disappearing. It must learn how to love without hiding behind the old self. Until then, the battle continues. And you are allowed to choose peace while he chooses whether to keep fighting himself. That is not giving up. That is honoring your own awakening. Because sometimes your soul's lesson is not to wait until his mask falls. Sometimes your lesson is to stop shrinking in front of it. To stop negotiating with emotional unavailability. To stop calling potential enough when your heart needs presence. To stop abandoning your own truth because you can sense his hidden one. That is awakening too. So let the old mask and the awakened heart meet inside him. Let him feel the discomfort of being divided. Let him understand that numbness no longer protects him. Let him discover that the mask he thought was strength may be the very thing keeping him from the love, peace, and emotional truth his soul is asking for. And while he discovers that, remain with yourself. Because if his heart is truly awakening, it will not only feel. It will learn. It will mature. It will eventually understand that the mask cannot come where real love is asking him to go. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 7. The divine masculine enters a battle between the old mask and the awakened heart when he can no longer numb his feelings. The mask tries to restore control, silence, and emotional distance. The heart tries to bring him into truth, tenderness, grief, and healing. This battle may make him inconsistent, but it also reveals that the old way is losing power. And if he is brave enough, he will begin to choose the heart. Not because it is easier, but because it is real. Not because it guarantees comfort, but because it offers freedom. Not because feeling is safe in the old way, but because numbness is no longer life. And when he finally understands that, the man behind the mask begins to return. The man who can feel. The man who can grieve. The man who can love with presence. The man who can stop treating his heart like an enemy. That is where Chapter 7 leaves us. With the understanding that the battle between the old mask and the awakened heart is not a sign that nothing is happening. It may be the sign that everything hidden is finally beginning to rise. The question is whether he will keep choosing the mask that protected him from pain, or the heart that can finally lead him into healing. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 8. Because next we are going deeper into the regret that comes when the heart wakes up, and why the moment he can no longer numb his feelings may also be the moment he begins to see what his silence, distance, and fear have truly cost him. Chapter 8. The regret that comes when the heart wakes up. When the heart wakes up, regret often wakes up with it. That is where this chapter begins. Because for a long time, the divine masculine may have been able to avoid regret by staying numb. He may have kept the emotions beneath the surface. He may have told himself that everything happened the way it had to happen. He may have explained his silence, justified his distance, defended his choices, and convinced himself that he did what was necessary to protect his peace. But when numbness begins to break, those explanations do not always feel as solid anymore. The heart starts remembering not only what happened, but what was felt, what was avoided, what was left unsaid, what was pushed away before it could be understood. And that is when regret begins to rise. Not always as one dramatic realization. Not always as a sudden confession. Not always as an immediate return. Sometimes regret arrives quietly. It arrives when he remembers your patience. It arrives when he remembers the look in your eyes. It arrives when he remembers a conversation he ended too quickly. It arrives when he remembers a moment where he could have been honest, but chose control instead. It arrives when he realizes that what he called space may have felt like abandonment to you. That kind of regret can pierce him, because now he is not only feeling the connection, he is feeling the impact of his choices. And that is a very different level of awakening. Before the heart wakes up, he may focus mostly on protecting himself. His fear, his overwhelm, his need for distance, his discomfort with vulnerability, his inability to process what he feels. Everything centers around survival. But when the heart wakes up, he begins to feel beyond himself. He begins to see that his silence had an echo. His distance had consequences. His avoidance created confusion. His numbness did not only protect him, it may have hurt someone who was trying to love him. This realization can be painful, because regret asks him to face what fear cost. It asks him to look at the moments when his heart was touched, but he acted untouched. It asks him to remember the tenderness he minimized, the truth he buried, the words he withheld, the emotional responsibility he avoided. It asks him to admit that being afraid does not erase the effects of what he did while he was afraid. And that is where the masculine ego may struggle. Because the ego wants excuses. The heart wants truth. The ego says, I did not know what else to do. The heart says, but now you see what it caused. The ego says, I needed to protect myself. The heart says, but protection without care became distance that wounded. The ego says, I was overwhelmed. The heart says, then why did you not communicate instead of disappearing? These questions can humble him. And humility may be exactly what his awakening needs. Because regret, when it is honest, does not exist to destroy him. It exists to teach him. It shows him the gap between who he was in fear and who his soul is asking him to become. It shows him where he abandoned tenderness. It shows him where he confused silence with safety. It shows him where emotional immaturity created pain. And if he is willing to listen, regret becomes a teacher. But before it becomes wisdom, it may feel unbearable. He may replay moments differently now. A message he did not answer. A truth he did not speak. A softness he did not protect. A goodbye he made colder than it needed to be. A moment where he saw your heart open and still chose to hide his own. At the time, he may have told himself it was easier that way. But now, with the heart awake, easier does not feel better. Easier feels like avoidance. Easier feels like fear. Easier feels like the moment he chose the mask over the truth. And that recognition can ache. Because regret often carries a sentence he does not want to hear. I could have handled that differently. That sentence is heavy. Not because it means he is a bad man. Not because it means he must punish himself forever. Not because it means everything can be repaired exactly as it was. But because it means he must stop hiding from responsibility. He must stop pretending he had no choice. He must stop using fear as an explanation that cancels impact. He must stop treating his emotional limitations as if they did not affect another heart. He must grow beyond the version of himself that only knew how to protect himself by withdrawing. That is the real initiation. Regret asks him to become accountable. And accountability is not shame. Shame says, I am bad. Accountability says, I can see what I did, and I can choose to become more conscious. Shame freezes him. Accountability matures him. Shame makes him hide again. Accountability helps him return to truth. This distinction matters deeply, because when regret rises, the divine masculine may be tempted to numb again. The pain of seeing his own avoidance may feel too intense. He may not want to sit with the memory of what his silence cost. He may not want to face the tenderness he left unprotected. He may not want to admit that he pushed away something meaningful because he did not know how to stay. So he may try to bury the regret. He may say, it is too late anyway. He may say, there is nothing I can do now. He may say, she probably does not care anymore. He may say, I should just leave it alone. Sometimes those thoughts are discernment, but sometimes they are fear wearing the mask of acceptance. Because true acceptance is peaceful. Avoidance disguised as acceptance feels heavy. True acceptance says, I understand what happened and I honor the truth. Avoidance says, I will not look too closely because it hurts. And if the heart is truly waking up, it will keep asking him to look. Not to torture him, but to free him from repeating the same pattern. Because if he never lets regret teach him, he may do it again. He may become numb again. He may pull away again. He may silence himself again. He may hurt another connection in the same way again. He may keep choosing distance whenever emotional truth asks him to mature. That is why regret must be honored. Not worshipped. Not used as self-punishment. Honored. Because regret reveals where consciousness was missing. It reveals the moments where he was present physically, but absent emotionally. It reveals the moments where his fear was louder than his care. It reveals the moments where he let the old mask make choices the awakened heart would never have chosen. And once he sees that, the question becomes, will he keep defending the old self? Or will he let the old self teach him what needs to change? That is the doorway. He may begin to understand that his silence was not neutral. It may have protected him from discomfort, but it left someone else in uncertainty. He may understand that his distance was not as harmless as he told himself. It may have helped him regulate, but it may also have created emotional instability. He may understand that his numbness did not make the feelings disappear. It only delayed the truth and made the eventual return more painful. This kind of insight can change a man. If he allows it, he may become more tender toward the past. He may feel sorrow for the person he was then, the man who did not know how to speak, who did not know how to stay, who did not know how to admit that something mattered before fear convinced him to hide. But he may also feel sorrow for you, for what you did not receive, for the clarity he did not give, for the warmth he withdrew, for the confusion his distance created, for the ways his numbness may have made you question your own intuition. That is when regret becomes relational. Not only, I hurt, but my choices had an effect. This is a powerful stage. Because love matures when a man can feel the impact of himself. Not only his own fear, not only his own longing, not only his own grief, but the emotional reality of the person standing across from him. That is empathy. And empathy is one of the signs that the heart is truly waking up. Because numbness narrows the world around self-protection. Empathy widens the world into care. Numbness says, how do I avoid pain? Empathy asks, how did my avoidance create pain? Numbness says, I needed distance. Empathy asks, did I communicate that distance with love and respect? Numbness says, I was overwhelmed. Empathy asks, did I leave someone else alone with the confusion I could not handle? These questions are not meant to shame him. They are meant to awaken responsibility. And responsibility is where regret becomes sacred. Because without responsibility, regret only becomes emotion. He may feel bad but not change. He may miss you but not grow. He may replay the past but still avoid the maturity needed to repair, apologize, or live differently. But with responsibility, regret becomes transformation. It becomes the voice that says, I do not want to handle love that way again. I do not want fear to make my choices for me. I do not want to disappear when tenderness needs protection. I do not want to make someone feel alone because I am uncomfortable with my own feelings. That is the beginning of a different man. Not a perfect man. A more conscious man. A man who understands that emotional depth requires emotional responsibility. A man who knows that if he needs space, he must communicate. If he is afraid, he must not turn fear into cruelty. If he feels overwhelmed, he must learn to regulate without abandoning. If something matters, he must not treat it as disposable just because vulnerability makes him uncomfortable. That is the awakened masculine learning through regret. And still, this does not mean regret automatically brings him back. That is important. Sometimes regret leads to repair. Sometimes it leads to apology. Sometimes it leads to honest communication. Sometimes it leads to a deeper understanding that changes future behavior. And sometimes, regret simply teaches him what he must never repeat. Not every regret is an invitation to return to the past. Sometimes regret is an invitation to become wiser for the future. He may realize that the connection mattered, but also understand that the timing, damage, or emotional immaturity cannot be undone easily. He may realize he cares, but also know that care must become more than a late feeling. He may recognize that he hurt you, but understand that healing requires more than reappearing because he feels sad. This is where maturity is tested, because the unawakened masculine may return only to relieve his own guilt. He may come back because regret becomes uncomfortable. He may seek reassurance that he is not the villain. He may want your warmth to soothe the pain of what he now sees. He may want access to your forgiveness before he has fully understood the impact of his actions. But the awakened masculine does something different. He does not return only to feel better. He returns with responsibility, with humility, with clarity, with respect for your healing, with the understanding that his regret does not entitle him to your openness, with the willingness to acknowledge what happened without making you carry his guilt. That is the difference between regret and repair. Regret feels. Repair honors. Regret says, I am sorry I feel this pain. Repair says, I understand that my actions created pain, and I want to meet that truth responsibly. That is a sacred distinction. And for you, this chapter carries a powerful reminder. If his heart wakes up and regret rises, that does not automatically mean you owe him access. His regret may be real, but your healing is real too. His sadness may be sincere, but your boundaries still matter. His realization may be powerful, but realization must become consistent action before it can become trust again. Do not confuse a man's regret with his readiness. Do not confuse his emotional pain with emotional maturity. Do not confuse the fact that he finally feels the cost with the proof that he now knows how to love differently. Let his regret teach him, but do not let it pull you back into a cycle that has not truly changed. This is not bitterness. This is wisdom, because you can have compassion for the regret that comes when his heart wakes up while still honoring what your heart needs now. You can recognize that he may finally see what he could not see before, while also knowing that seeing is only the beginning. He must choose what kind of man he becomes after seeing. Will he apologize without expectation? Will he communicate with honesty? Will he respect your boundaries? Will he learn from the pain instead of using the pain to seek comfort? Will he let regret become growth rather than another emotional wave that passes without transformation? These are the questions that matter, because regret alone does not heal the connection. Conscious action does. Humility does. Consistency does. Truth does. A willingness to stop repeating the same pattern does. And if those things are not present, then his regret may be part of his awakening, but it may not be safe enough to become part of your life. That is okay. You are allowed to let someone awaken without giving them the power to reopen what you have worked hard to heal. You are allowed to forgive without returning. You are allowed to care without re-entering confusion. You are allowed to wish him growth while choosing peace for yourself. That is your awakening. Because sometimes the divine masculine's regret shows him what he lost. And sometimes it shows you what you are no longer willing to lose in yourself. Your clarity. Your softness. Your emotional safety. Your trust in your own intuition. your ability to love without being pulled into someone else's unfinished lessons. This is where the journey becomes sacred for both. His heart waking up may bring regret. Your heart waking up may bring self-respect. His regret may ask him to become accountable. Your self-respect may ask you to stop accepting potential without presence. His awakening may say, I finally see. Your awakening may say, and I finally choose myself. Both can be holy. Because love is not only about reunion. Sometimes love is about truth. Truth that changes him. Truth that frees you. Truth that honors what happened without pretending it did not hurt. Truth that allows regret to become wisdom instead of another chain. That is the deeper meaning of this chapter. When the divine masculine can no longer numb his feelings. Regret rises because the heart begins to see clearly. It remembers what fear tried to erase. It feels what numbness delayed. It recognizes the impact of silence, distance, avoidance, and emotional unavailability. And if he is brave enough, regret becomes the doorway into accountability. But he must choose that doorway. He must choose not to run from the pain of seeing. He must choose not to numb the guilt. He must choose not to return only for comfort. He must choose to let regret make him more honest, more careful, more emotionally present, and more responsible with love. That is how the awakened heart matures. Not by feeling regret forever, but by becoming a man who no longer creates the same regret again. That is where Chapter 8 leaves us. With the understanding that when the heart wakes up, regret often rises. Regret for the silence, the distance, the tenderness he denied, the feelings he numbed, and the emotional impact he may not have understood at the time. But regret is not the final destination. It is a sacred teacher, asking him to turn pain into awareness, awareness into responsibility, and responsibility into a new way of loving. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 9. Because next we are going deeper into when he finally begins to feel himself again. And why the return of emotion is not only about grief or regret, but also about the divine masculine coming back to life from the inside out. Chapter 9. When he finally begins to feel himself again. There comes a moment when the divine masculine realizes the feelings returning are not only about pain. They are about life. That is where this chapter begins. Because when numbness first begins to break, it can feel frightening. The buried emotions rise. The grief comes forward. The regret becomes louder. The memories return with weight. The silence becomes full of everything he tried not to face. At first, feeling again may feel like being pulled into everything he avoided. But then slowly something begins to change. He starts realizing that the return of emotion is not only breaking him open. It is bringing him back. Back to tenderness. Back to honesty. Back to the hidden heart. Back to the part of him that still knows how to care. Back to the part of him that was never truly dead, only protected, frozen, and waiting. That is when he finally begins to feel himself again. Not the version of himself who performed strength. Not the version who hid behind silence. Not the version who called numbness peace. Not the version who stayed busy to avoid the truth. The real self. The self beneath the control. The self beneath the guardedness. The self beneath the fear. The self beneath the old masculine mask that told him feeling deeply was dangerous. And this can be one of the most sacred parts of his awakening. Because he may have spent so long disconnected from his own emotional world that feeling again almost feels unfamiliar. He may not know what to do with the softness that rises. He may not know how to hold the ache without judging it. He may not know how to let tenderness move through him without immediately wanting to protect himself from it. But even with the discomfort, something in him begins to recognize the truth. This is me. Not the numb version. Not the defended version. Not the version who kept running. But the part of me that can still feel. And that realization can be quietly powerful. Because for a long time, he may have believed that numbness made him stronger. He may have believed that emotional distance gave him control. He may have believed that not reacting, not longing, not grieving, not admitting tenderness meant he had mastered himself. But now he begins to see that mastery without feeling was not wholeness. It was disconnection. And disconnection can look calm from the outside, but feel empty on the inside. That is why the return of feeling can become a gift. A painful gift, yes, but still a gift. Because feeling again means he is no longer completely separated from his own heart. It means the inner world is waking up. It means the parts of him he exiled to survive are beginning to come home. It means the divine masculine is no longer only confronting what he lost outside of himself. He is confronting what he lost within himself. His capacity to be moved. His ability to be tender. His willingness to admit longing. His emotional honesty. His connection to the part of him that can love without immediately turning love into danger. And when those parts begin to return, he may feel grief and gratitude at the same time. Grief for the years he spent numb. Gratitude that he can still feel it all. Grief for the tenderness he denied. Gratitude that tenderness is still alive. Grief for the heart he abandoned. Gratitude that the heart never fully abandoned him. This is a deep and sacred contradiction. Because awakening is not always clean. Sometimes it brings sorrow and relief together. It brings the pain of seeing clearly and the peace of no longer lying to yourself. It brings the heaviness of regret and the quiet hope that something inside you is still capable of changing. That hope matters. Because when the divine masculine begins to feel himself again, he may begin to understand that his emotional life is not his enemy. His sadness is not here to destroy him. His longing is not here to weaken him. His tenderness is not here to humiliate him. His regret is not here to trap him in the past. His grief is not here to prove he failed. These feelings are here to return him to truth. They are here to show him what mattered. They are here to show him what needs healing. They are here to show him where he has been absent. They are here to show him the difference between survival and aliveness. And this is where real healing begins. Not when he stops feeling pain, but when he stops treating pain as something he must numb. He begins to realize that emotion can move if he allows it, that grief can soften if he listens to it, that longing can reveal something sacred if he does not shame it, that regret can become accountability if he does not hide from it, that tenderness can become strength if he learns to protect it instead of burying it. This is the beginning of emotional maturity. Because emotional maturity does not mean he is never overwhelmed. It means he starts becoming responsible for what rises inside him. He may begin to pause instead of immediately running. He may begin to breathe instead of shutting down. He may begin to ask what he feels instead of pretending he feels nothing. He may begin to notice the old impulse to numb and choose, even briefly, to stay present. That small choice is powerful. Because every time he stays present with what he used to numb, he strengthens the awakened heart. Every time he names a feeling instead of burying it, the old mask loses authority. Every time he allows tenderness without shame, the inner masculine becomes more whole. Every time he faces grief without collapsing into avoidance, he learns that feeling does not destroy him. It teaches him. This is how he begins to return to himself. Not through one dramatic moment, but through a series of honest moments. A moment where he admits, I am sad. A moment where he admits, I still care. A moment where he admits, I was afraid. A moment where he admits, I miss the softness I pushed away. A moment where he admits, I do not want to live numb anymore. These admissions may happen privately at first. They may not arrive as messages. They may not become immediate action. They may not look like the confession someone else hopes to hear. But inside him they matter. Because the first person he must stop lying to is himself. And when he stops lying to himself, his whole inner world begins to shift. The body relaxes in places it has been holding tension. The heart begins speaking more clearly. The mind becomes less invested in defending the old story. The soul begins to feel less buried under the weight of avoidance. He may still be afraid, but fear is no longer the only voice. He may still be guarded, but the guard is no longer unquestioned. He may still feel the pull toward numbness, but now he knows numbness has a cost. That awareness is the beginning of freedom. Because before awareness, he believed the mask was who he was. After awareness, he begins to see the mask as something he wore, something he learned, something that helped him survive, but was never meant to become his permanent home. And this is where he may begin to feel compassion for himself. Real compassion. Not excuses. Not denial. Not self-pity. Compassion. He may begin to understand why he became numb. He may see the wounds that shaped him. He may remember the moments when he learned that feelings were unsafe, that need was dangerous, that softness could be used against him, that silence was easier than being misunderstood. And this compassion can soften the shame. Because shame says, something is wrong with me. Compassion says, something happened to me and now I have a choice. That choice is sacred. He can keep living from the wound, or he can begin healing it. He can keep using numbness as armor, or he can learn how to feel with boundaries, awareness, and courage. He can keep believing masculinity means emotional distance, or he can discover that the deepest masculine strength is the ability to stay present with truth. This is the new masculine emerging. Not a man who is ruled by emotion, but a man who is no longer terrified of emotion. Not a man who collapses into every feeling, but a man who listens to what feeling reveals. Not a man who abandons logic, but a man whose logic is no longer used as a weapon against his heart. That is balance. That is integration. That is the divine masculine beginning to feel himself again. And as he returns to himself, he may begin to see the world differently. The same distractions may feel emptier. The same silence may feel more honest. The same memories may feel less like threats and more like messengers. The same tenderness he once feared may begin to feel like something sacred he wants to protect. He may begin to notice beauty again. Not in a dramatic way, but quietly. A slower breath. A deeper reflection. A softened reaction. A moment where he lets himself feel without immediately judging it. A moment where he realizes he is not dead inside, and maybe he never was. That is a holy realization. Because numbness can convince a man that the heart is gone. But the heart was not gone. It was hidden. It was waiting beneath the old defenses, waiting for him to become ready enough to feel without abandoning himself. Waiting for him to stop treating emotion as a threat. Waiting for him to realize that the feelings he buried were not enemies. They were pieces of his own soul asking to be returned. This return may also change how he sees the connection. He may begin to understand that the connection was not only about another person. It was also a mirror. It showed him where he was numb. It showed him where he was guarded. It showed him how much tenderness still lived beneath the surface. It showed him how deeply he could be affected, even when he tried to deny it. And this can bring a different kind of gratitude. Not necessarily easy gratitude. Not always happy gratitude. But soul-level gratitude. The kind that says, this connection showed me where I was asleep. This pain showed me where I was still defended. This longing showed me that my heart still reaches. This regret showed me where I need to become more conscious. This awakening showed me that I do not want to live disconnected anymore. That is when the experience becomes more than loss. It becomes initiation. A passage from numbness into truth. A passage from performance into presence. A passage from emotional absence into emotional responsibility. And if he allows this initiation to complete its work, he will not be the same man. He may become quieter but more honest. Softer but stronger. More reflective but less avoidant. More aware of what he feels, and more careful with what other people feel too. That is one of the signs of true awakening. His feelings do not only make him think about himself. They make him more aware of how he impacts others. Because numbness often limits empathy. When he cannot feel his own pain, he may also minimize the pain he causes. When he avoids his own emotions, he may avoid the emotional reality of others. But when he begins to feel himself again, his capacity for empathy can deepen. He may begin to understand what his silence felt like. What his distance created. What his lack of communication may have done. What it means to leave someone in confusion because he was afraid of his own truth. This awareness can be painful, but it is also necessary, because love without empathy is incomplete, and masculinity without emotional responsibility remains immature. So as he begins to feel himself again, he may also begin learning how to care more consciously. Not just care silently, Not just care in memory. Not just care when regret becomes loud. But care in action. Care in communication. Care in accountability. Care in presence. Care in choosing not to turn fear into emotional harm. That is where feeling becomes growth. Because feeling alone is not enough. Feeling must become wisdom. Wisdom must become responsibility. Responsibility must become a different way of loving. This is the stage where he may begin to understand that the purpose of feeling again is not only to reconnect with what was lost. It is to become someone who will no longer abandon truth so easily. Someone who can say, "I am overwhelmed," instead of disappearing. Someone who can say, "This matters," instead of pretending it does not. Someone who can say, "I need to understand my fear," instead of letting fear make every choice. Someone who can say, "I am sorry," not to erase the past, but to meet it with maturity. That is emotional rebirth. And it is not always visible immediately. Sometimes the deepest shifts happen in silence before they become behavior. He may be processing, reflecting, feeling, seeing himself in ways he avoided before. But the question remains, will this inner awakening become outer change? Because that is the real test. A man can feel himself again and still choose old patterns. Or he can let the return of feeling become the beginning of a new life. He can let emotion rise and then numb it again. Or he can let emotion teach him how to live differently. He can feel regret and stay trapped in shame. Or he can let regret become accountability. He can miss the connection and still remain silent. Or he can learn that truth deserves communication. That choice belongs to him. And for you, this chapter carries a message of deep clarity. If he begins to feel himself again, you may sense it. You may feel a shift in his energy. You may feel that the numbness is breaking, that the old mask is weaker, that something inside him is becoming more alive and more aware. But remember, his return to feeling is not the same as his readiness to love maturely. It is a beginning, not a guarantee. It is sacred, but it still must become embodied. Do not abandon your own healing because his heart is beginning to wake up. Do not make his emotional return the center of your life. Do not confuse his inner movement with the consistency, clarity, and responsibility that your heart deserves. You can honor his awakening from a place of peace. You can have compassion without waiting in pain. You can wish him wholeness without losing your own. Because your journey matters too. Maybe his lesson is learning to feel again. Maybe your lesson is learning not to chase someone just because he finally feels what you knew was there. Maybe his awakening is the return of his heart. Maybe yours is the return of your power. And both are sacred. This is where the story becomes bigger than the connection. Because when the divine masculine finally begins to feel himself again, it is not only about romance. It is about the restoration of his inner life. It is about a man remembering that his heart is not a weakness. It is about the masculine soul returning from emotional exile. It is about the part of him that was frozen beginning to thaw, breathe, and speak. And if he honors that return, he can become more whole than he has ever been. Not because he never feels pain again, but because he no longer has to run from pain. Not because he becomes perfect, but because he becomes present. Not because he has all the answers, but because he becomes willing to listen to the feelings that once terrified him. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 9. When the divine masculine finally begins to feel himself again, he is not only feeling the connection, he is reconnecting with his own soul. The grief, longing, tenderness, regret, and emotional truth that rise are not here to destroy him. They are here to return him to the hidden heart he abandoned in order to survive. And once he begins to feel himself again, he stands at a powerful threshold. He can go back to numbness. Or he can step into awakening. He can choose the old mask. Or he can choose the living heart. He can continue surviving. Or he can begin to truly live. That is where Chapter 9 leaves us. With the understanding that the return of emotion is not only painful, it is sacred. It means the heart is coming back online. It means numbness no longer owns him completely. It means the divine masculine is being invited to stop performing strength and start embodying truth. And if this chapter spoke to you, Stay with me for chapter 10, because next we bring everything together with the sacred awakening after emotional numbness, and why the moment he can no longer numb his feelings may become the very moment his soul begins to rise. Chapter 10. The Sacred Awakening After Emotional Numbness. In the end, emotional numbness does not break because he is being punished. It breaks because his soul is ready to return. That is where the final chapter begins. Because when the divine masculine can no longer numb his feelings, something sacred is happening beneath the discomfort. Something deeper than longing, deeper than regret, deeper than the memory of a connection he tried to bury. His heart is coming back online. The part of him that was frozen is beginning to thaw. The part of him that was silent is beginning to speak. The part of him that stayed guarded to survive is beginning to realize that survival is not the same as living. And that realization changes everything. Because for a long time, numbness may have seemed like protection. It kept him from falling apart. It kept him functional. It kept him composed. It helped him move through life without having to face the full weight of grief, love, shame, longing, tenderness, or regret. But numbness also kept him away from himself. It kept him away from the truth. It kept him away from emotional intimacy. It kept him away from the softness he secretly needed. It kept him away from the man his soul was trying to become. So when numbness finally breaks, it may feel overwhelming at first. The memories return. The feelings rise. The grief becomes louder. The distractions stop working. The old mask no longer feels as strong. The connection he tried to minimize begins revealing what it truly awakened in him. And he may ask himself, why am I feeling this now? Why can I not stay numb anymore? Why does the silence feel so full? Why does the past still have a voice inside me? Why does something in my heart feel like it is waking up after being asleep for so long? Because the soul can only stay buried for so long. Eventually, what is real begins to rise. And when it rises, he has a choice. He can run back into numbness. Or he can finally listen. He can rebuild the wall. Or he can ask why the wall had to exist in the first place. He can call the feelings inconvenient. Or he can recognize them as messengers. He can treat vulnerability like danger. Or he can let vulnerability become the doorway into truth. That is the sacred awakening after emotional numbness. It is not just about feeling again. It is about understanding what the feelings are trying to teach him. The grief may be teaching him what he never fully honored. The regret may be teaching him where fear made choices for him. The longing may be teaching him what still matters. The tenderness may be teaching him that his heart was never dead. The memory may be teaching him that what touched the soul cannot always be erased by silence. And if he is brave enough to listen, the feelings that once frightened him can begin to heal him. Not because they are easy, but because they are true. This is where the divine masculine begins to understand that numbness was not strength. It was a shield, and while that shield may have helped him survive, it cannot help him love. It cannot help him become honest. It cannot help him build emotional intimacy. It cannot help him become the man his soul is asking him to be. The awakened masculine is not the man who feels nothing. He is the man who can feel deeply without running from himself. He is the man who can grieve without becoming ashamed. He is the man who can miss without pretending he is unaffected. He is the man who can admit tenderness without calling it weakness. He is the man who can face regret and turn it into responsibility. He is the man who can say, I was numb because I was afraid, but I do not want fear to lead my life anymore. That is real strength. Not the strength of the mask. The strength of the soul. Because the mask can only perform power. The soul embodies truth. The mask can pretend to be fine. The soul asks for healing. The mask can hide pain. The soul transforms it. The mask can keep love at a distance. The soul learns how to meet love with presence. And this is where his awakening becomes more than emotion. It becomes responsibility. Because if he can no longer numb his feelings, he cannot keep pretending that silence has no consequences. He cannot keep acting as if emotional distance is harmless. He cannot keep hiding behind confusion when the deeper truth is fear. He cannot keep using numbness as a way to avoid the maturity love requires. Feeling must become honesty. Honesty must become action. Action must become a new way of living. Otherwise, the awakening remains incomplete. Because a man can feel deeply and still avoid growth. He can regret and still refuse accountability. He can miss someone and still remain silent. He can cry in private and still fail to show up with maturity. That is why the final lesson is not only that he feels. The final lesson is what he chooses to do with what he feels. Will he let his feelings soften him? Will he let regret mature him? Will he let grief teach him? Will he let tenderness return him to the heart? Will he let the collapse of numbness become the beginning of a more honest life? That choice belongs to him. No one else can make it for him. Not you. Not the connection. Not the memory. Not the longing. Not even the pain. Pain can open the door. But he must walk through it. And this is important for you to hear. You may have been the mirror. You may have been the softness. You may have been the person who awakened something he could not keep buried. You may have been the connection that showed him where he was numb. But you are not responsible for saving him from his own awakening. You are not here to drag him into emotional truth. You are not here to convince him to feel. You are not here to wait forever while he learns how to be present with his own heart. You are not here to become smaller, so his numbness can remain comfortable. His awakening is sacred. But your peace is sacred too. His feelings matter. But your emotional safety matters too. His return to the heart may be beautiful. But your return to yourself is just as holy. So if he can no longer numb his feelings, let that truth meet him. Let the silence teach him. Let the memories speak to him. Let the grief soften him. Let the regret mature him. Let the heart he abandoned call him back home. But do not abandon yourself while he decides whether he is ready to answer that call. Because your love is not a waiting room for his courage. Your softness is not a place where he can hide from his own responsibility. Your heart is not here to be touched only in silence, remembered only in regret, and valued only after distance has revealed what he lost. You deserve more than being the person he finally feels after he could not feel himself. You deserve love that is awake while it is present. Love that speaks. Love that chooses. Love that protects tenderness in real time. Love that does not need to lose you before it understands your value. And this is where your inspiration begins. Because his emotional numbness breaking may be part of his awakening. But your self-respect rising is part of yours. Maybe he is learning how to feel. And maybe you are learning how to stop chasing someone into feeling. Maybe he is learning that numbness is not peace. And maybe you are learning that confusion is not love. Maybe he is learning to face his heart. And maybe you are learning to choose the people who can meet yours. Both awakenings matter. This journey is not only about whether he returns. It is about whether both souls become more truthful. For him, truth may mean admitting that numbness was fear. For you, truth may mean admitting that hidden feelings are not enough. For him, healing may mean learning to feel without running. For you, healing may mean loving without abandoning yourself. That is sacred balance. Because love is not meant to be one person awakening while the other person waits in pain. Love is meant to be truth meeting truth. Présence meeting présence. A heart that can feel meeting a heart that can stay. And if he is truly awakening, his feelings will not only rise. They will transform him. They will teach him to communicate. They will teach him to take responsibility. They will teach him to stop treating tenderness like danger. They will teach him that the heart is not something to numb, but something to understand. They will teach him that the man he becomes after numbness breaks must be more honest than the man who hid behind it. That is the sacred invitation. To become real. Not perfect. Real. To become emotionally alive without becoming emotionally reckless. To become vulnerable without losing grounding. To become loving without running from the responsibility love requires. To become masculine in a way that includes the heart, not in a way that buries it. That is the awakened divine masculine. A man who no longer worships numbness as strength. A man who no longer hides from his own tenderness. A man who understands that feeling deeply is not the danger. The danger was living disconnected from the truth for so long. And when he finally sees that something inside him can rise, the hidden heart, the honest voice, the softer strength, the man beneath the mask, the soul that was waiting for him to stop running. That is the blessing inside the breaking. When numbness breaks, the heart breathes. When the heart breathes, truth rises. When truth rises, healing becomes possible. And when healing becomes possible, the divine masculine can finally begin to become the man he was always meant to be. Not the man who feels nothing, but the man who feels, learns, grows, and loves with consciousness. So let this be the final message. If he can no longer numb his feelings, something in him is waking up. But awakening must become responsibility. And if you have been touched by this journey, let something in you wake up too. Wake up to your worth. Wake up to your peace. Wake up to your boundaries. Wake up to the truth that you do not have to chase someone through their numbness to prove that your love was real. Your love was real because it came from your heart. Your worth is real whether he can feel it or not. Your future is real even if he is still learning how to face his past. So bless the awakening. But do not lose yourself inside it. Let him feel what he must feel. Let him face what he must face. Let him choose whether he will return to numbness or rise into truth. And you choose yourself. Not with bitterness. With power. With grace. With the quiet knowing that the love meant for you will not require you to disappear while someone else learns how to feel. If this message spoke to your heart, write in the comments. Feeling is the doorway. Like this video if it gave you clarity. Subscribe to the channel for more divine masculine, soul connection, and emotional awakening insights. And share this message with someone who needs to remember that when numbness breaks, it is not the end. It may be the first breath of the soul returning to life.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you. Until next time, beautiful soul, trust the journey.